How are you doing, by the way? I always forget to ask that question.
Wait, we're humans, like we, yeah, I'm good. It's warming up where I am and trying to get excited about wearing shorts and flip-flops again. So, but yeah, I'm doing
Oh yeah.
well. Yeah, man, how you doing?
Yeah, not bad at all. Just in a slight existential crisis due to YouTube probably slowly killing my channel. But that's beyond the point. I'm still gonna try doing what I'm doing as best as I can, and if it's gonna die, then it is what it is, I guess. But for now, I'm here.
You're too big to fail. You're not gonna die.
Oh, I don't think so. I don't know.
The people have spoken. It is so.
All right. Well, you're optimistic.
You have to be, especially if you're going to create content for other people. If you're just always sad, then they'll be sad. We can't all be sad together.
Yeah, yeah. I try not to be too sad, but sometimes when you work really really hard and then you see those analytics and it's not what you would hope it'll be, then it kind of hurts. But
Right.
at least the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive for our latest episode, also for the videos as well. So
Yeah.
I'm 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 very happy about that.
Yeah. And so today is March 29th. It's Tuesday. So this is about a week and a few days or so, or about a week since we did the previous podcast, I think, roughly. I
Yeah.
don't, not compared to when we posted it, but maybe when we recorded it at least, maybe 9 days or so. And the comments, I read all of the comments on the YouTube channel as well as Patreon, and there was some really interesting feedback. There's a couple comments that I definitely would like to comment on. I didn't see the Reddit post. I don't spend much time there, but what was your overall, consensus from the feedback about the long form podcast?
Well, I think that people generally like that long form podcast because they can really go into listening to an in-depth conversation about this stuff, and there's value in there. Because I don't think that we are just rambling about nonsense. We're actually, providing some really useful information for people. And a lot of the people that were listening to the podcast have been exposed to peer-to-peer systems like Briar or Cwtch for the first time, and that's something positive. And also, people on Reddit have been discussing the vision that we've been laying out, which currently does not exist. Not even Briar or Cwtch are actually there,
Right.
but generally speaking, the debate is actually pretty exciting, and even more people are actually, interested in having something like that in the coming future. So yeah, that's something that gives me that hopium, that dose of hopium.
And for those, one of the questions someone emailed me even directly was when we mentioned these things, we'll try to do better at identifying what we're saying or a resource to it. So, like when we said Cwtch, which is spelled CWTCH, .im is the URL. I haven't spent any time looking at that other than their website. I understand it's kind of a surveillance resistant, tool that works similar to like Tor and using different relay nodes, so to speak. And Briar can be used peer to peer. Well, is used peer to peer without any central servers. We switched over from using Session to communicate. We switched over to Briar, and I noticed that you also made a recommendation or offered up an idea of a different Patreon level for your Patreons to be able to collaborate, communicate through Briar. And it seemed like it was ho hum, kind of mixed signals on that one. But were you able to look at anything deeper into the feature sets of one platform versus the other?
Yeah, sure. So actually, the Cwtch network and Briar are both trying to achieve something very similar. So Briar is mostly targeted towards activists and dissidents, journalists, but also like general people, but they start from there. So the threat model for Briar users is extreme anonymity and resilience to central point of failure. So there is none in Briar. And Cwtch is also trying to do something similar, but their ethos is enforcing consent, so that there is complete resilience to metadata surveillance. There's actually no metadata that can be intercepted on the Cwtch network, and the same goes for Briar. And the way they achieve, both Cwtch and Briar actually achieve this, is they do this with providing an hidden onion, or turning your device into a hidden onion service, because it is a peer-to-peer network. But if you have a peer-to-peer network, you're always going to know IP addresses of the peers, right? So to protect their IP addresses, you are not actually communicating with their IP, but rather you're communicating with that hidden onion service through the Tor network. Therefore, the metadata is not there. This is really awesome. This is something that centralized services cannot provide at all, because it's impossible technologically. And the feature set for Briar is actually a little bit larger, because I think maybe Cwtch is maybe smaller or maybe younger, but Cwtch right now only offers messages. But a cool feature about Cwtch is that while you do create one account for your device, and the device credentials are and the account credentials are actually stored on your device, you can create more identities than one. And I actually like this feature, because it's very convenient for you to manage multiple identities that are completely compartmentalized, which is something that I really like. So you could have one identity for your friends, one for your coworkers, one for whatever else, public maybe, and maybe one for OnlyFans, and Briar doesn't have that. Briar actually forces you to use one account on your device, which is a limitation. However, Briar does have more features. It does actually try to replace something like Twitter with the micro-blogging feature. So you can actually blog and have your blogs be followed by your peers that are connected to you through either Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, or even the regular internet over Tor. And there are also some forums that you can create. I don't really see what the difference between a blog and a forum is, other than that you can reply in a forum. And there's also a group chat, which is just a regular group chat. And Cwtch is also trying to do group chats, but Cwtch doesn't really have blogs or forums. And I love both of these. I like the idea that they both exist. But one caveat that one of the commenters on YouTube actually pointed out is that none of these are actually mesh networks. This actually means that they are not routing the traffic. So this kind of like defeats my utopian vision, because my utopian vision requires that the devices are actually routing. So what this means is that if you open up your Briar on your device and you have your account there, you are only carrying the traffic for the peers that you are connecting to. You are not delivering the traffic of the whole network. And so that's the limitation there.
Is that what part of the snag was when you were trying to manage your connection while also running Orbot and tunneling information, where even if you disconnect, it won't try to connect? You know what I'm saying? So you don't leak your IP address out, where you had to... You figured out a workaround, or you figured out how to make it work with Briar. But was that part of why that was a bit of an issue for you, getting it configured, Briar to run with Orbot?
Yeah. The way I configure my devices, my mobile devices, is that I force all of my traffic to go through Tor, and I use Orbot for this. And you can do this very easily just by enabling VPN mode in Orbot, and then enforcing always on VPN and blocking all connections without a VPN, which means that all connections will be going through the Orbot app, and Orbot will be routing that through Tor. The problem is that Cwtch, the app on the Android, and also Briar, the app on Android, are configured themselves to be routing their own traffic through Tor. And they need this because they need to actually run the onion hidden service. Orbot doesn't run an onion hidden service. It's just routing your traffic through Tor. So it's a bit different. So for some reason, I don't know where the problem is and where it should be fixed, but if you are forcing your device traffic to go through Tor, then Cwtch and Briar will not be able to create an onion hidden service and you will be offline. You will not be able to connect. You will be able to use Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, but not the internet connection. So the way I went about this is that I set up manual proxy settings for my network. It is not a really proper solution because you have to do this per network. And I kept always on VPN so that if a connection is dropped, then I lose internet access. However, if Orbot crashes, then I leak my IP address. Not through Briar, not through Cwtch, but through my other connections, and I don't want to do that. So in order to prevent leakage, if my connection, if my Orbot app crashes, I force proxy settings on my network to go through Tor. And the only way they can go through Tor is if Orbot is running and the app is actually routing through Tor. So I did this by setting the proxy host to localhost and port to 8118.
Okay.
And then as long as Orbot is running, then you will have connection, all of your device connection being routed through Tor.
Okay. So I guess that is kind of interesting, highlight the differences a little bit, but they're kind of similar. I know in the hated one, I guess we can code name be the hated network utopian environment, there wouldn't be a dependency of an always on or internet connection, so to speak, with air quotes, that it would actually just serve as kind of a node without outside of Tor or any other network, I would imagine, right? Is that kind of the idea, the utopian mentality, but also without revealing any kind of specific identifier? Like maybe it could have a randomized identifier. Like we just talked about how with Briar, and especially right now, I think with Matrix is the same way. If you are going to do voice or video communication, it is more stable peer-to-peer, but then it will reveal the peer's IP address. So if you were trying to do that, you would need a way to masquerade the IP address so it doesn't disclose that for the peer information, if you will. I don't know if it's like a peer or a node, but maybe I'm getting into the weeds. I'm just trying to kind of talk this out a little bit so that I can understand for myself and maybe others who are listening. Your kind of your utopian environment, and we're kind of looking at what Briar and Cwtch offer today, and how they're still dependent on the Tor network. Even if you're running Orbot or not, they're going to connect to Tor on their own, and it looks like even run their own hidden service, which is kind of cool. But how would you do that without an internet connection?
So I'm not really sure if this is possible. So I actually would need to consult this with multiple experts in these arenas, because all of these projects are trying to do a very niche thing. So Briar is really working well for the activists, but it assumes that at least some of them is going to have the access to the internet. What my vision assumes is that I'm sorry. What my vision assumes is that there is no internet at all, so that all of the connections, all of our traffic is being routed to the devices that we are using on a daily basis. Now, I'm not sure how possible this is to do with the current technology, because it does require, as you mentioned, running some nodes that are able to carry the traffic and the bandwidth of the traffic, because there will be other people's content coming through your device. It wouldn't have to be stored on your device, but it will have to come through it one way or another. It's kind of like, like you run your onion relay, although that's a different thing, but it's just passing through your device. Right. It is not actually being stored on your device.
Right.
But it does require some sort of infrastructure that can replace what we already have with the pipes, telecoms, satellites, cable, and even fiber optic. It would work better obviously in more densely populated urban areas. But there are mesh devices that can actually replace Wi-Fi antennas and wires, telephone wires, or copper cable, etc. And it would require maybe some sort of incentive for people to do this, which is going to be a problem. But yeah,
Yeah,
it
I'm chuckling because we kind of know where that leads to, right? I mean, then you start going into the whole, blockchain based services,
yeah.
incentivizing with tokens, so on and so forth.
Yeah, and I am not very positive about incentivizing this with blockchain because I don't know. That's a whole topic on its own, and I'm not
Well,
sure if I want to
because you
go
hate
in there.
crypto, apparently. You hate crypto, and it.
I'm just disillusioned with
I'm,
this with a lot of this technology
I
because
know.
it's
I've seen
not
your
really
videos. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
It's not really solving the problems that we are actually trying to solve with this. So I think what Briar and Cwtch are doing is amazing, but I think we would have to have some sort of a mesh network that would be able to route the traffic. It would also have to have some sort of onion network on there.
Right.
It wouldn't be Tor because Tor is interlinked with the clear internet that we have. It is kind of like the whole point of Tor. But you can have onion services outside of Tor, like Session has an onion protocol, if I'm correct. Maybe I'm not, but I think they do. I think it's called Loki Network or something like that.
Yeah, it sounds familiar.
Um,
I've
yeah,
I've done a little research on that stuff, also on I2P protocol, which is similar to Tor, but and not they have their kind of their own differences, which we can get into another time. But I think that if you were able to have like a very easy deployable ROM, like an image that you could just flash to an SD card and throw in a Raspberry Pi with a couple of Wi-Fi antennas on it, or I kind of in my mind vision like I don't know if you're familiar with like the pineapples. They're basically used for well, all sorts of things. They can be used for. They're most known to be used for man-in-the-middle attacks. So you could set up a pineapple. It's just a little device, looks like a little Wi-Fi router that runs custom software that can basically intercept traffic, but it can also be used for other things. So my thought is like if you could have some devices that again, we haven't solved the incentivizing problem. I don't know if it's a problem, but then again, people are not necessarily incentivized to run Tor relay nodes either. They do it because they choose to do it. So it could be more organic, though. It might be easier to have a widespread adoption if there was an incentive or a street cred or a badge. You gamify it. I mean, obviously, people are going to say, well, if you can make money doing it, it's like that's not really the point. But I mean, it is a point to be taken. I just really think that when you start introducing financial gain to run those things, then it'll become more centralized, right? Then it's like a handful of big
yeah.
players could be then trying to monopolize on it. But anyway, I don't want to diverge too far. It just seems like if there was a way starting out you could run a node pretty easily on a Raspberry Pi or some low power device to act as that relay, that it could be super beneficial. Because my thought was like, okay, let's just say a dozen people are talking on Briar, and I mean, at some point you would assume that if Briar is running on the phone's connected to something, a cell service of some kind. So it does have access out. But if you wanted it to be completely independent from that and just, have Briar connecting peer to peer, at some point, how do you get to a peer that's out of range, right? If you're coordinating something or you're communicating or you're talking to a journalist or whatever, maybe a journalist is talking to the source over Briar, they could be in a coffee shop across the room from each other communicating, not connected to the internet. That's pretty powerful. Like you start thinking about the use cases of what Briar can do like right now, that's really cool. But then it's like, how do you scale that a little bit further? How could the journalist be in a coffee shop? And if you think of people as nodes, you could have like Briar relay, people with phones running Briar only are in the vicinity to make it even super safe for the person that's maybe communicating with the journalist. And I'm just trying to think of ideas. So, how would you replace those people with say Briar with maybe just a little box or a Raspberry Pi. That's kind of where my mind's going. Like how do you?
Yeah. I think the best way to maybe conceptualize this is that people are not incentivized just by monetary means. They're also incentivized by the value proposition. And that for many people could be as simple as, well, I just want to talk to my grandmother if their internet is down, and it turns out that because of the hurricanes or tornadoes or floods or earthquakes, the pipes and copper is always down, and I cannot rely on that. I cannot rely on my phone network. I need a way to communicate with my grandmother, and I need to make sure that she is safe. And I think another value proposition is that if this setup can actually be powerful enough for people to finally have a social network. And I'm not saying social media. That's a bit different. Just
Right.
your own social graph without any sort of medium in between. Then that on its own is already rewarding enough for a lot of people. It doesn't have to give them money, and they don't have to spend any money on this. So I think the way that this could take off in the maybe not so distant future would be maybe you would have a device that is capable of handling multiple gigabits or terabits of traffic. Well, probably gigabits of traffic, and that'll be like a normal thing. And it would also have like maybe multiple terabytes of fast speed storage on your device. Then you could have that. It would be a ubiquitous device that's always in your hand, your phone, and it'll be doing all the things that it needs to be doing for the mesh network to work, for creating and providing nodes without you having to do anything. You just install the app just runs itself. The battery life is amazing. Maybe there's going to be some new innovation in the battery department, and it's just going to last for a long time. It kind of requires like more technologies to be converging together, kind of like the internet was created. It wasn't just one piece of technology, it was actually multiple standards and protocols coming together year over year, maybe decade over decade. And all of a sudden we had the World Wide Web, and then we had the HTTP protocol, and then everything else, and the programming languages, and it all came together. And suddenly we have the commercial internet that we have today. So I think that something like this would have to happen again, and it would actually replace what we currently have. And I think it will be a lot more successful than any other attempts like breaking up the big tech or some sort of regulating them as social public utilities.
Right.
So it does require more than one thing to get better than what we have right now.
I think that
go ahead.
From what you've explained about Cwtch and what I'm looking at on their website and using Briar, I've only been using Briar for maybe the last year and a half to 2 years, and that's just been playing around with it. Part of the problem is finding people to communicate on there to begin with. And the second challenge is that for people if there's people out there like myself that are not as big of a fan of typing only on your mobile device, but would rather be typing on your keyboard, on your laptop or computer, that it's just a lot easier. So for instance, it has the forums and the blogs inside of Briar, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, I really don't want to type an article on my phone, maybe a guide. That would just be painful. So I'm probably not going to do it. If I could type it on my computer, yes, I could type it on my computer, copy and paste it, get it to my phone, then paste it to there. Just if there was a synchronization between the phone mobile device and my desktop, that would just make life a lot easier. I think maybe the adoption would be bigger. But the fact that you can only communicate from the phone, and I understand the use case for Briar is kind of more focused on the dissident, the protester, the journalist, and that makes sense because you probably don't want that conversation on any other device, only that device that's in your control. That makes sense. But when you start adding in the blog and the forum functionality, I'm kind of thinking to myself, well, it's not just then now for protesters and dissidents and things of that nature or journalists. You're trying to make it kind of a social network in a sense, in that there's more reasons to connect, not just to communicate one-to-one, but also to passively consume other people's information or content that they're putting out there. So how do I be a content creator on a platform where I can only type on the phone? I know there's a desktop app. It's beta. I haven't installed on my desktop, but it doesn't synchronize the same account that I have on my phone. It's like I can create the same account with the same name, but it's not the same. Whereas with Cwtch, I kind of like this idea. Now, granted, Cwtch doesn't seem to have the forum or blog functionality, but it definitely has the functionality that most people are kind of already used to if they use Signal, where you have one-on-one chat or group chat. The idea of having compartmentalized profiles to be able to have different identities or pseudo identities, very attractive to me, because I think like a lot of people, they're kind of more willing to have friends connected into a friend, like a friend chat, and then you could have a different pseudo and identity if you wanted to connect with a more unknown group of people on the internet based around a topic or something, you know. So I kind of wish that these things existed together. What I'm kind of getting to is that you would have that. I know you can kind of do that again on Briar. I'm just not loving the experience. But then again, it's not really designed to be a great user experience. It's designed to be more bulletproof. So I kind of get that.
Yeah, yeah, I actually agree with you here. I think the user experience actually has to be top notch because otherwise, people are going to be making mistakes and it's not going to be that bulletproof. And this is what I actually liked about Signal when they really started this new approach that security has to be easy, because even if you're well aware of all the security precautions that you have to take, you're still bound to make mistakes due to simple facts like you might just make a mistake, you might not pay attention, sometimes you might be too stressed out or something like that. So yeah, user experience is extremely important. It does have to get better. And I still think that Briar and Cwtch are both in kind of like its inception, kind of like where Signal was, maybe even before it became Signal. I've been using Signal since it was called Text Secure, and it was a horrible experience back then. But it went a long way since then, and I think this is what's going to eventually happen to Briar or Cwtch. And I think what's actually interesting is that Cwtch is doing things a little bit different, a little bit more differently than Briar is doing them, because, for example, for the group chats, actually, Cwtch is creating a server that can be self-hosted or it can be from a third party. And I haven't spoken to these people yet, but from Sarah, the executive not producer, director of the organization that I don't know the name of right now. I think it's called Open Privacy. It's a Canadian organization, and they are developing Cwtch. And her take is that self-hosting has to be a seamless experience. It has to be like you don't have to actually buy a Raspberry Pi device. It just runs itself on its own on the hardware that you already have. And I kind of agree with that. And I mean, we don't have our laptops always on or desktops, but we do have our phones always on. The battery life on the phones is not that great, but if you can make improvements, one step at a time, then you can get to the point where it becomes so easy and so seamless and so cheap to do this that it'll be hard for people to resist the value proposition of this network. And I'm talking like an investor. I'm not, but there's no investment in this. I'm not affiliated with any of these projects at all. I just really love what they're trying to do, and I'm just really hoping for them to do good, to do well, because I think this could be our way out of all of the centralization problems that we are facing with the current state of the internet.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think that it needs to be easy to simplify things, and not that Briar is hard, but I'll give you an example. If I wanted to port my Briar account from one Graphene OS phone that I have to another, I don't know how to do that. It's not very portable. Like when you go into the settings, I don't see a recovery or anything like that. So I assume that this account exists only on this device, and I can't really recreate this environment. Maybe I could using Seed Vault or some kind of backup. I know Graphene OS is moving away from Seed Vault, but I'm just using that terminology, to restore So if what's the use case? Well, if I got to ditch this phone for one reason or another, I'm a journalist. I've been communicating with sources, and I am about to. I feel like the government and the country I'm in is cracking down, and they're coming close to me. So I take my Tails OS USB thumb drive, I burn it, and I throw my Graphene OS Pixel into a trash can, or whatever. Just how do I get, if I can get my hands on another phone to reconnect to these sources, like how do I reconnect back to them? That's like the head scratcher. And that's where I say this has got to be easier. It doesn't have to be easy as pie, but it needs to be somewhat like easier. Now, I'm just talking about one app, and I'm not talking about Cwtch in this example. I am also looking at their openprivacy.ca website, and it looks like you're correct about the core team for the under the organization tab. So I think we just need to get more information and talk to some experts, like you said, and see where the holes are that need to be addressed and identified that would be kind of like areas to focus on. But I am at the same time excited to try Cwtch out because it looks pretty cool, honestly.
Yeah, Cwtch does actually look beautiful. I actually like the color palette a lot more than Briar's, but that's just personal preference. Regarding the synchronization between multiple devices, that's actually pretty difficult to do with a peer-to-peer network. That's actually one of the problems, because your account only exists on your device where you actually create the account. It doesn't exist anywhere else. So it doesn't actually travel the internet. It doesn't stay in the cloud. It doesn't even, it's not even transmitted to the cloud. It only stays on your device. So I think this is kind of a limitation of the technology itself. And I think there are going to be some trade-offs. It's not going to be, we're going to have the best of the both worlds, and it's going to be completely utopian without any sort of setbacks. For me, it's utopian because I'm pretty open to losing many of the benefits of the centralized systems in exchange for getting the benefits of a decentralized system with its drawbacks and limitations as well. That's me. That's also personal preference. Maybe if people decide that this is not for them, they want a centralized system, then that's what it is. But centralized systems also have their limitations, and they're not going to be able to respond to those limitations in any way. They're just going to hit the ceiling, they're going to hit the wall, and from there, there's no way out. So we've already actually hit those walls. Like, for example, we are hitting the capacity of the computational power that we are able to produce to carry the traffic of the internet and maintain all the computations that we need. So we can build more data centers, but each of the data center that we create is not going to be more efficient. So the marginal increases in efficiency are pretty much over. And that means that as the internet grows, as it stands right now, the traffic is going to be a lot heavier. It's going to be a lot more difficult to do regular things. It's going to be a lot more costly for the social media companies to run and subsidize their free services, because they largely rely on artificial intelligence to sort through the piles of data that they're collecting on people, and also deliver the feeds. That's also artificial intelligence. Google search is also artificial intelligence. And so the bandwidth is actually going to double over the next several years because of the expansion of internet traffic through the African and South American continent, and also some of the poorer regions in Asia. And we are talking about billions and billions of new devices that have never been connected to the internet. Now they're going to be there. And so all of these central companies, Google, Amazon, I'm sorry, I need to drink some water.
Yeah, go for it, man. Well, especially if they all start streaming Disney Plus,
Yeah.
That's kind of a joke.
I'm sorry about the cough. I'm not sure what's going on. I'm pretty sure that's not COVID. Actually, streaming is very minimal, and your data, your photos, that's minimal. The heaviest burden of the internet is actually AI computations. And these companies, they actually need that AI to function. Like everything is AI. Like your keyboard suggestions, that's AI. Like Apple is using AI. All these companies, they're using AI. And we kind of relied on that. And now we are hitting the ceiling. And if we are going to be building more data centers, then we are also going to be needing more energy to cool them, to run them. And we're also going to be using a lot more water. And we are running out of water in the sense, well, there's always going to be the same amount of water on Earth. But the water that's available for us to use for cooling, for drinking, for farming, we are running out of that. We are running out of the reservoirs that are being created by the last ice age. They're thousands of years old, and we're not going to have the next thousands of years of old to replenish these reservoirs. So the internet, the central internet, it cannot grow forever. So the scale is limited there as well. And I think that this sort of peer-to-peer decentralized network that doesn't actually have any limits on how many devices can actually be connected to the network, then that could actually be a pretty good solution to this problem.
Yeah, I there's a lot of benefits, and I think that there are some trade-offs with the more functionality that people are comfortable with. But at the same time, I think that some of those trade-offs might be worth it when you compare it to what exists today, which is, with the exception of things like Session or Signal to a degree, are centralized communication platforms, whether it's SMS or iMessage, WhatsApp, are probably the most used today. Signal is probably getting up there. It's gotten bigger, I think, in the last couple of years, but you still have kind of the same issues, and you also still are tied to a mobile number as opposed to some sort of just unique. What I love about Session is that you just have a unique session ID, right? So as long as you can get that session ID to somebody, it doesn't matter what phone you're on that's using it, with the SIM card, with the phone number. None of that stuff matters. And I like Session for the communication aspect because I can link. I know it's a trade-off, but I can link that conversation from my mobile device to my desktop, and their desktop clients work really well. That's what we're using right now to record this episode, is we're using Session. And, some of those fuller, rich features I like personally. It would make me want to use something like that more than trying to convince someone to use Briar. I would convince them more to use Session, only because of those features. Now, if it was somebody who had a very specific threat model that was, pretty serious, then that would be reevaluated, of course. But I guess maybe could kind of segue into the whole next, area, if you're willing, is how do you define your threat model, and what type, depending upon that threat model, is then how you decide or research which tools might be best for you to fit that model. And I think that's kind of where we're at right now, with trying to weigh out the pros and cons. What are the benefits? What's the, zero knowledge? What's the, anonymous factor versus, well, I kind of wouldn't mind having it on other devices, and I also like the pretty pictures and the cool icons, and I like animated, funny GIFs or GIFs, depending upon how you pronounce it. But, because that's what makes conversation entertaining for a lot of people. I know, being able to, pull up a quick animated GIF to, emote your feeling about the context is kind of like, seems like normal now, like a normal response rather than just using an emoji. If, especially with current news and things going on, I don't know, it seems to be used quite a bit more than I've ever seen before.
Oh yeah. Just one correction. I think we are using Matrix, not Session for this.
I'm sorry. You're right. We talked about using Session, but we wanted to try Matrix. Yeah. And you're correct. I stand corrected. We It's funny because you and I have been communicating on session, and then we've been communicating on Briar, and now we're actually just doing this recording on Matrix. So yeah, I got a little flipped around there. But yeah, you're correct.
Yeah, we also tried Big Blue Button and Jitsi.
Yeah.
So yeah, we
And
tried everything.
yeah, and the goal is to try things that are either A, open source, or B, decentralized, or just not some of the big tech company tools. So no Skype, no Zoom, no Microsoft Teams, and I don't think either of you and I, well, I don't know if you run Microsoft. I don't have any Windows, but you
No.
know, it's just like we don't want to use that stuff. The whole point, if we're talking about anti-censorship and anti-surveillance, is to not use tools that would directly fall under that umbrella.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, yeah, because if we can do it, then we have no authority to tell people that they should do it as well. That's kind of my position.
I would agree with that 100%.
Yeah. So you wanna go to the threat models, huh?
If you want to, I feel like
Yeah, I do.
it's
I
a good
do.
natural segue.
Yeah. Yeah. So actually, I have my take on the threat model thing. That might be a little bit controversial, but I think that some people are overdoing it because when a total noob normie, and I don't want to mean this in a disparaging way, but like a regular non-techie person just goes to a forum on privacy and they ask, well, how can I protect my privacy? And they say, what's your threat model? Well, you're overdoing it, my man, because most people actually have the same threat model. So for most people, the threat is actually going to be like corporate surveillance and maybe some government surveillance that's unjust. Government surveillance is not a problem just for people like Snowden or people that are trying to flee the NSA or CIA. For most people, their biggest threat is just going to be the corporate surveillance and government surveillance. And I think that corporate surveillance is the most immediate one that people are going to be exposed to. So the threat of corporate surveillance is basically like Facebook, Google, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, and big and non-big tech companies are going to try to collect your data to monetize it one way or another. Maybe they're going to be trying to serve you ads on their platform, or maybe they're just going to be they're going to try to sell or share your data with maybe some third-party companies that are trying to purchase it for whatever their purposes are. So these will be maybe data brokers or insurance companies, whatever else is out there. And I think this is a threat to most people because you don't actually have any consent in this just because it tick a box. You don't actually know how many different companies and organizations and individuals are actually going to be looking at your data and what they're going to be doing with that data. And they're going to be doing all kinds of things that are going against your best interest, and they are going to be significantly inconveniencing your life. And I think that when people ask this question like, "What's your threat model?" sometimes people respond with, "Well, I don't know. I just kind of like I just browse the internet. I just want to be safer." When you want to do your threat model, you want to actually talk about the threat, not yourself, and you need to know the capabilities of your adversaries. You need to know who your adversaries are, what they can actually do, and how likely are they how likely they are to actually do it. So threat modeling is important. For most people, it's going to be very simple, just evading corporate surveillance. But you actually raise a very good point here, is that a lot of people have very strong opinions on what they consider to be secure, anonymous, or private. This is going to vary vastly depending on that threat model. Some things that are objectively more secure are not going to be the best choice for everyone. For people that need more anonymity than security, they might have to be willing to compromise better security for more anonymity. And that's kind of like my take on this thing.
Right. Right. So on my podcast, I focus more on the privacy aspect than I do the security aspect, because I feel like there is a bit of a gap in knowledge that people need to kind of put in the time to learn when it comes to security. And that just requires less convenience in some ways, and being more vigilant about, not clicking on links, not opening emails that you don't know where they're from, and using password managers, using two-factor authentication, so on and so forth. That's kind of those are kind of security things. Those are all very important. But privacy, when I think about privacy, and what most of my topics are aimed at, is to kind of shield yourself from corporate surveillance. Yes, in doing so, you'll also kind of have a leg up on just overall mass surveillance in general by obfuscating your identity or obfuscating your purchasing and things of that nature. But I've said it more than one time. If you're trying to avoid a government, a nation state, especially a powerful one, you're gonna need the ultimate. Ultimately, you probably don't even want to have a phone or a computer on your person, and when you are communicating, it's going to be using a burner. Your most recent video on a burner phone for protesters is a great resource to look at, which is basically pay for everything in cash. A SIM card not registered to you, and you're running graphene. Don't even install any apps. If you do, just install a few apps from F-Droid, like Orbot, maybe Briar. Don't install Facebook on it. Don't install Instagram on it. It's like don't be an idiot when it comes to that stuff. If you're trying to evade law enforcement or a nation state or something of that nature, drug cartel, I don't know what the situation is, but most people are not falling into that category. They want convenience. They want to be able to do a lot of things from their personal devices that you would not go to that extent to shield, right? Meaning a Graphene OS all paid for in cash burner phone versus an everyday use, smartphone, smart device, or computer. If you were a journalist or something like that, you probably have multiple devices. You're compartmentalizing out on a physical level, not just within a technology, in your technology layers. So I think corporate surveillance is probably the most common threat model that most people would agree, or most people that are at least surfing Reddit and asking these types of questions would fall into. If you're a drug dealer or something, you probably already know. And if you know, you're probably not listening to this because you already know the information. So or maybe not, or maybe you're thinking about becoming a drug dealer or something like that. In which case, take whatever you can. I hope it helps you in your endeavors.
Well, I've been around a lot of dumb drug dealers that have been doing this over like Facebook chats. So yeah, they still need this help.
Yeah, it's like when I see some of these drug kingpin documentary style TV episodes and things of that, like on Vice or something, and like they're talking about how they use Snapchat to connect with people and stuff. It's like, are you kidding me? Like they'll actually use Twitter and use certain hashtags and stuff. Like they intentionally use it. But I think, a lot of people are using those tools in a way that's like they're pretty savvy with it. But at the same time, I'm thinking to myself, like, come on, man. Like what, that's pretty trackable if you become a target. And I think most people think, and I think most of the people won't become a target. And, but I think that a lot of people think they can kind of go down this rabbit hole thinking, what if I'm a target? Then how do I protect myself? In which case, you're fucked already. You really are. If that's the transition over, like they already know where you are, who you are, what you're doing, and you just like burn the house down to the ground and leave, with nothing. I don't know. But that's not really kind of like the main audience that I think we're kind of talking to. So I kind of go with a threat model of corporate surveillance. There are some things that I do that are a bit beyond that for my own personal. Like I have compartmentalized threat models depending upon what tasks I'm doing and what machine or device I'm doing them on. But that is not most people. So, it can get very nuanced, and I think people can get really into the weeds in the comments and going after people saying like, well, if you're doing that, you're exposing yourself. It's like, well, come on, man. There's a lot of LARPing going on in these communities and some of these, subreddits and things that I've kind of just cruised through. And it's even happened from our last episode where I was talking about self-hosting. Someone was talking about, well, if it's on a VPS, it's not self-hosting. It's like, yeah, but that's just one way of doing something. It's like if you're hosting very sensitive information, then I hope you're hosting it only on a server that's on your network And I hope you're backing it up and having offsite backup somewhere for that kind of thing. But for a lot of other use cases, there's nothing wrong at all with running a VPS, running a Nextcloud server on there, especially if you're collaborating with colleagues or you're using it for work, some personal. Again, you identify the threat model and then you use the technologies available to you to fit within that model. And if it doesn't, then you don't use that technology stack. You pick something else. Maybe instead of using Nextcloud, you just go ahead and use, some sort of vault software to encrypt data to a thumb drive and put it into a safe or bury it into a PVC tube in the backyard. I don't know what you're doing. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't really know. But there's, all obviously more secure ways to do something than kind of the mainstream options in the open source community. If that kind of makes, I don't know, sense. So
Yeah.
it's subjective, right? It's subjective based upon your situation. And I am,
Yeah.
in a different situation than a lot of other people, especially if you're in a media controlled, government controlled country. It's very different, especially if they're coming after those people who are trying to speak out against their government propaganda. Wow, your threat model is going to be very different than mine.
Exactly. This is an extremely important point, which also kind of shapes my privacy and security strategy and what I try to teach people. Because I don't like the idea that when people say that, well, iPhones are inherently more secure than Android phones, therefore you should use an iPhone. I think what you should do is that you should have your equipment, devices, your setup adaptable, because your threat models are going to be changing depending on your context and your situation. So, for example, you might be fine generally as a regular person, like nothing special about your position. You work for a corporation, but maybe your threat is actually your employer. Employee surveillance is actually a big threat today. Worker surveillance is a big problem, especially if you're trying to unionize. You might want to actually be knowledgeable about how to communicate securely or maybe anonymously when you are trying to spread your worker agenda, if you are trying to do this. If you are suddenly in an abusive relationship and you have a partner that you are trying to escape, well, in that case, government surveillance is not going to be your biggest threat. You're going to try to actually escape your partner and find a way to safe haven. Then for most people, again, that's going to be just regular corporate surveillance. Most people are not going to be exposed to these extremes, but it could happen to anyone. Anything could change your life, change your context, your situation. You might want to go out protesting. You might want to go out striking. You might be in different scenarios, and it is beneficial for you to know your threat models, and to be able to adapt them depending on what you need in the current situation. And I think it's just good to have the knowledge and the skills to do this, even if you don't do them, even if you don't need them majority of the time. And for example, like one of the best practical ways to think about different threat models is, in my case, I don't want to take my devices, storage equipment to the border. I want to avoid that. And that's because border agents, even in the United States, and that's actually within a 100-mile radius within the border, can force you to unlock your device without a warrant. And they will go through your device. They will do whatever they want with any kind of content and data on that device. They can copy it. They don't even have to return your device, and it could be a nightmare. And in that scenario, I would do something that's unthinkable to a lot of people in this security and privacy sphere, and that's to put my things on cloud. And for most people, I would not recommend them to put their passwords and most sensitive files and documents on the cloud, even if it's encrypted. I would still encrypt it, of course, but it's still dangerous to put it on the cloud. It's better to have it in a cold storage. But if you are crossing the border and you know that you could be forced to unlock your devices, then it's better to have no devices at all, or just keep your devices completely empty. And in that case, I'm going to have my backup in the cloud temporarily and anonymously, of course. And when I cross the border and I no longer face the threat of being forced by the government to unlock my phone or devices, then I'm going to download that encrypted folder and I'm going to remove that from the cloud. So this is how your threat model can change just, through by crossing the borders through a single, one day route traveling across states or, across countries.
Sure. I mean, this might be the scenario where, let's say, you have an XKeypass database, and maybe you also have contacts. So you have a what is it, a CVF or VCF file, whatever. I'm just brain farting on it at that moment. But your contact file, and things that you would just need no matter where you were. Maybe some crypto keys or something like that to a specific wallet or something. You could literally fire up any kind of somewhat trusted VPS like DigitalOcean, Linode, something for like $5 a month. You could veracrypt that file on your desktop, put that SSH in, close off all access to it other than just maybe SSH, put it on there. You could even, if you wanted to, shut the server down if you really wanted to be ultra secure. And whenever you got to a destination anywhere with a web browser, you could log in, fire up that that virtual server, log in, download that file, and store it to USB or something like that. And you could re-download Veracrypt, re-download your apps if you need. I mean, there are ways. That's what I'm saying. It's really specific on the use case. I really just get kind of annoyed with people when they say blanket statement. Oh, you shouldn't use VPS, or oh, you shouldn't do that. That's not secure. It's like, well, if you don't have a process, if you don't have a workflow for using it, it may not be. But if you kind of use these tools in a way that is that only you kind of know about, that'd be really hard. Like if you were stopped at the border, how would they know that you have that? How would they know? There's no way of knowing that. Could you reset your phone fast enough and everything? Maybe, but you have to, whatever you have on you is kind of could be exposed. So if it's a crypto wallet, if it's like obviously there's, if you're carrying crypto, I would only do it on something like a cold card or something where you could have like a panic number, or there's mechanisms built in where if the PIN number is entered incorrectly, it automatically nukes itself. It's totally useless at that point. If you were going somewhere with their high probability of that happening, probably wouldn't take those devices to begin with. So maybe what you do is you travel with an already wiped, de-Googled phone, and then you just set it up once you get where you're going. You go ahead and download your Nextcloud app, resync everything, use DAVX to resync your contacts and everything, because only you know the URL, only you know the login in your head. And, that way you could have a phone on the other side and then start actually getting access to your stuff. The only way that you could easily do that is if you have an internet accessible server to do that from. So, I kind of run through a lot of different scenarios and use cases. And again, I live in an environment where not to my knowledge, under that kind of surveillance by government. But I just really think that the answer should be just, it depends. And instead of saying, what's your threat model, in asking more questions first, like who or what is it you're trying to avoid? Is it just tracking and corporate ads and marketing trackers and vacuuming up your personal information? Well, then you don't have to be that crazy with your OPSEC, right? But if you're a journalist or you're writing stuff or you're a researcher, then it's a little different. Maybe you should only be traveling with live distros like Tails, or maybe you should, be using burner phones that you can talk. I don't know. It just kind of depends. But to say no one should ever do blah, blah, blah is insane to me, because it's ridiculous to just blanket statement those types of things. But everyone has their opinion, and I listen to a lot of opinions, and I have a few of my own, and I'm not right about everything. I totally acknowledge that, and there's always room for improvement. But I try to be as reasonable and just kind of level-headed as possible when it comes to these things, because you can drive yourself insane going down these rabbit holes. And if you're doing it to try to be ultimately just 100% anonymous and secure, forget about it. It's not going to happen. I mean, you could get close, But we're humans, we make mistakes, and there's going to be things that you just have to be willing to say, like, okay, I want more, kind of going to the earlier conversation. I would like a little more convenience. Okay, so the trade-off is going to be I'm not going to be quite as secure or quite as private. If you're okay with that, then who cares? It's fine. If it works for you. I think more than anything else, it's to wake people up who are not already into what's happening around them and how it alters their opinions and viewpoints on different, current affairs, whether it's politics or financial or whatever, and to just understand what they're actually giving up on a daily basis, just to be cognizant of it, right? And then the next step is to then how do you start incorporating changes to limit that exposure, not cut it off completely, but just limit that exposure. And as you get more familiar, that's when you actually are at the point where I think you can start to determine what your threat model actually is. Because in the beginning, you don't know where to start. You don't have a clue. People will say, well, delete Google, delete Gmail, delete the It's like, whoa. First of all, don't delete your Gmail, but maybe yes, switch over to something else. But that's like, you're so far away from answering that question in the beginning is my point, that until you're actually somewhat familiar with what it is that you're already giving up all day, every day, then how could you answer what is your threat model?
Yeah, I really love everything that you said here because and it really speaks volumes about how we should be approaching these things correctly and how we are approaching these things incorrectly. And I can sense that you're pretty upset about that one comment. All of the comments were overwhelmingly positive, but that one comment that really
Honestly, no, it didn't upset me really that much. I think that comment resonated a common theme I see in chat rooms. I hang out in Graphene OS Off Topic. I hang out in Calyx OS Texters. I hang out in self-hosting blog. There's a lot of different places I'm hanging out, and I see people get quickly berated by veterans of security and privacy that kind of start to bark. And this is nothing new. If you've been using Linux or open source for any more, you go back 10 or 15 years, you ask a pretty just basic question. It's, RTFM, read the manual, search STFW, search the freaking web, you kind of get these like knee-jerk responses from people that, granted, I kind of understand their point of view sometimes, where it's like they've done all the research, they've done all the work, they have all the answers, and they want other people to go work for it for themselves. But the thing of it is, if you want mass adoption of decentralized or open source software and tools and networks and VPNs and using Tor, you have to be approachable, you have to be kind and make it easy for them to get started somewhere. Even just using things like, even saying self-hosting, I've mentioned this before. To self-host a Nextcloud, though it's getting a lot easier, it's not easy. It's not one click and you're done. It takes work. It's going to cost you some money, whether you're self-hosting. Maybe you could do it on an old laptop. But my point is that it does take some effort. But it's worth it. It's worth it if you're trying to pursue the breakaway from iCloud or Google, or Dropbox or Amazon or something where there's, you're using as a data store and you want to move that to something that you're in control of. But it comes with responsibility, because you also have to be willing to accept that if you screw up or you don't have a backup and your house burns to the ground, on heaven forbid, that you're kind of on your own in that regard. There's no support necessarily. The support is the open source community and the forums. So when you go there to ask questions, you get barked at, it kind of starts to take away from like the desire to keep doing it sometimes for some people. And I just, so it's not so much that one comment out of 100 and some odd comments that you had on that, I think it's more than that. It just, someone say, "Oh, this guy got triggered by it." It's like, well, maybe I did, but it's because it's such a broad scope that you really need to ask more questions before you jump to an answer. It's like, I don't know if anyone out there is into shooting firearms in America. They're still legal. And a lot of times you hear stories of people going into a gun store who are new to guns, and there's the old redneck behind, with a beer belly behind the counter, trying to sell a gun to somebody that's really not the right fit for them. Oh, you need to get a 1911. If it's not a 45 ACP, it's just not worth it. It's kind of like, that's bullshit. That is such a load of crap, but it's like, that's kind of how sometimes people in these communities can kind of be, is like just kind of old, stuck in the mud. Like there's only one solution, and the one that you're picking isn't it. So, you're going to be berated.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I'm actually really glad that you took the chance to clear all these things out, because there's always a way to elaborate on this, and I'm very confident that you have explained your position pretty reasonably, and most people are going to understand this. I understand this. I don't have a VPS server. However, I see value in there, and I do have different setups that do require some cloud storage, but it's mostly for crossing the border. And it's a common tactic. Like it's good to just be able to have that. It's not just crossing the border. I'm just talking about myself. But you are correct. Like something could happen to your physical equipment, and if you lose that, like what are you gonna do? And having that VPS, yeah, something could happen to Google or Amazon or whoever is behind that, but the chances of that happening are pretty pretty low compared to something happening to your equipment. And there is this sentiment that of these blanket statement in the community is also expressed in things like, well, there's always some sort of way to get into your device, to get through your layer of security and privacy. Therefore, you have no privacy at all. And one of the examples of this is because the CIA exists, and because there is the black budget, and you actually don't know what their capabilities are. They're basically capable of getting into every device. Therefore, nothing ever matters. Whatever step you take, it doesn't matter. You're not private at all. The internet is not private, so you should just give up, or you should just not try. And I think that's also nonsensical, because these steps actually do matter. Encryption works. Encryption does make things a lot harder. It is mathematically impossible to break encryption with our current technology. You can bypass it. You can bypass the implementation. You can find loopholes there, but in many cases, it does really make the job of the surveillance apparatus a lot more difficult, and it counts. And people should recognize that. People should recognize the nuance. And I think you did deliver that nuance with self-hosting excellently here in this segment, because it does make sense in different scenarios. It's not for everyone, maybe. It's not for every case. It might not be for that one person who commented that. I don't think it was in bad faith. I think that they did point out, I think they did point out a correct assumption that needed to be addressed, and I'm really glad that you actually did address this.
Sure, and there's a lot of validity to what they said, which is basically, hey, if you're hosting your next cloud server on a VPS, it's kind of like the mentality of like, not your keys, not your Bitcoin. If you're not in control of it, then that means someone else could access it. And that's totally true. That is absolutely true. On the other hand, though, too, self-hosting is typically referred to people hosting themselves at home. The trade-off on that is, if you want to access that information from the outside, you've either got to host a VPN on your network or open up ports, and now you're kind of potentially opening yourself up for more security risks for your home network. But if you're keeping your private stuff on a closed network, or a network that is maybe not accessible to the internet at home, and I'm talking like your tax documents, personal records, marriage certificates, birth certificates, whatever, possibly your photos and things like that. That all makes sense. But there's a lot of things that you might host that you might want access to, or to be able to share or collaborate with others, that you just don't want to do on Google Drive, that you don't want to do on Dropbox. So you want it to be in an environment that you can control, and you can encrypt your data even on a VPS. So, if you're using encryption, and I'm not talking about even just SSL, I'm talking about actually you can, Nextcloud makes it really easy to enable an encryption and disk encryption for your storage. So even still, you could make it very difficult for someone to access that data, even if they got access to the server, just like they would in any other environment. Like you said, it'd be a lot harder. Would you trust using Veracrypt to encrypt your most personal data and host it on a publicly accessible download? No, but you might feel more comfortable with it being okay maybe on Dropbox, so you could get to it from somewhere else. Probably, right? Because even though it's on Dropbox could see that file, they can't see inside of it. So I think there's just a lot of different ways to solve, this problem or this workflow, or you can come up with different ways to do that. And it was not to jump down somebody, but it was just something I wanted to address, was like, hey, there's a lot of reasons why you might want to host a Nextcloud on a VPS, especially for work collaboration, because Nextcloud has a lot of cool features built into it. It has Deck, which is kind of like a Trello replacement for storyboarding your story cards if you're working on software dev or anything like that. It has the ability, it has a Talk app built into it, which is kind of like it's a instant messenger, so you could use it for work to communicate from your desktop. You can also do voice and video calls inside of there. You've got your calendars. There's a lot of things you could use that for that would be super beneficial for personal or business reasons, that would make sense to be on a internet server, whether it's managed, unmanaged, or VPS, that you wouldn't necessarily want to manage all of that traffic coming in and out of your home. But anyways, we don't have to beat that horse. It's just, it's just kind of like, hey, think about all, again, going back to the threat metal conversation, what is it you're trying to avoid? So, what steps can you take? What firewalls can you put up? Whatever. That's probably going a little bit beyond the everyday person who might be just trying to get some basic privacy and security tips. But I know that a lot of people who listen to this type of content are already pretty savvy to a lot of these, software tools and, some of our workflows. So, they're going to be probably looking for maybe ways to, make changes, or maybe they have feedback for us, because I'm always open for feedback. I always want it, good, bad, or ugly. I just might get triggered as well.
Yeah.
So, that's cool.
Yeah, but I think this was actually an excellent point about threat models, that you need to decide for yourself what the reasons for using particular technologies are, and what the reasons are for not using those technologies. And the more you know, the better you can protect yourself. Privacy is not something that you can just set up once and forget about it. It's a continuous journey that is going to be changing depending on where you are, what you do, not just geographically, but also like in your life. Maybe you were single before, but now you're married and you have kids. That's a different threat model than being in a community, in a church community or something like that. So all these things, they add up to your unique case, and asking questions in the forums is definitely going to help you, but it also means that a lot of people are not going to necessarily be able to respond to your particular needs unless they are going to know them. So if people want to do the privacy journey right, and they want to seek like some sort of consultancy, some advice, they might need to specify what their situation is, and we can work from there. Yeah. And I find this beautiful. I actually find the diversity of setups really amazing, and I think that this adaptability and flexibility of the threat models is really unique, because it is sort of like medicine. It's like personalized medicine. You have epidemiology that is trying to do one thing for everyone, one size suits all, but you have personalized medicine that's kind of like trying to look at your specific case, what you are trying to achieve, what your background is, and that's going to be different based on person to person. based on some of your biological needs and personal needs. And that's the same thing for privacy. You're going to have different preferences that are relevant to you, that are not relevant to someone else at all. And just because you hear someone tell you that, well, this is not secure because of X, Y, and Z, that X, Y, and Z might not apply to you, and you don't have to just blindly trust someone that tells you not to use or do something, or to do something. They don't know you. You know yourself. So be encouraged.
Sure. Yeah, it can be fun to experiment and learn. That's what a lot of this journey has been for me. So you kind of experiment, and so before I even set up a Nextcloud server that I use for production at my home office and or online or anywhere else, I just played around with it for a while, and I figured out all the ways that I might like screw myself by using it, like how I was hosting it. Was running on a Raspberry Pi, I was running on a server, down in the basement, this and that. So it's like kind of trying to play around with it is the best way, just experimenting with things. And it can be fun to figure this stuff out. I also, think that it's fun to set up your own Matrix server, your own BTC Pay server, your own Mastodon server, your own Circs, server, whatever it is. Just pick something. And there's a lot of really cool tools out there for people that are not like, super Linux savvy, like Cloud Run and other Raspberry Pi images that you can just download, deploy, and most of it's all configured through a web interface. And, I don't want to take away from some of the fun technical stuff on the back end, but for people who are not super technical, there are some really slick projects out there that can kind of make it easy, like Umbrel, which is Umbrel. It's actually known more for running a full Bitcoin node, a Lightning node, but it runs on a Raspberry Pi. You download the image, you flash it to an SD card, you throw it in a Raspberry Pi, and everything you can do everything through web interface, including running your own Nextcloud server, your own PhotoPrism server, your own Vault Warden, which is the open source version, the GitHub version of running self-running your own Bitwarden. As well as tons of other apps you can install and play with, and just and if something is really cool for a specific implementation, you think like, okay, well, maybe I'll set up this one app on its own server in my house and I'll set up a VPN for it. Or maybe there's not a reason to run a BTC Pay server in my home. I'll set that up on a VPS because I'm not really trying, I'm not storing any personal files, my taxes and stuff there. It's like, you start figuring out like what might you want to run outside of your network versus keep everything inside. And I don't know. I'm also a nerd, so some of those things people might gloss over, like what is this guy talking about? But I really just want to emphasize that it can be fun and exciting. Get your kids involved, get your family members involved, go in and host something together, or with a co-op. It doesn't always have to come down to one person. If you have one really smart person in your family who's computer and tech savvy, and they're in IT or something, maybe you just get together one night and have a family dinner and say, hey, I think it'd be really cool if we had a Nextcloud server for our family. So-and-so, Joe, you're good at setting that stuff up. Is that something you think you could help us out with? Just kind of like those things, because that's how you get people to switch off of iMessage and WhatsApp and over to things like Session or Signal or Matrix or, anything else other than WhatsApp, right? Basically, or iMessage, like anything else would be better. Even if you start with Signal, that happens through just, I guess, being an evangelist. So there's usually an evangelist in every friend group, in every family, who's like the crazy person, the meme of the guy with the cigarette leaning up against the wall with all the charts, explaining everything. It's like, there's always that one person in the family. So that's usually the person that's advocating for some kind of a change. And I know everyone has their own uphill battles when it comes to this type of thing, especially if you're in like a small corporation, like maybe you're, say, like a 50 to 100 employee, and you'd like your company to start adopting privacy respecting policies. Maybe, for instance, instead of using Google Analytics, maybe you consider switching to Plausible, or things like that. It takes an advocate. someone has to initiate these things. And by us having this conversation and having these comments and conversations online around this, the hated network, what I'm referring to is the hated one's utopian peer-to-peer network. The only way that you can get closer to these things, though, is by having open conversation, having an ongoing dialogue, and being able to respect each other's differences, and just still find the common thread and keep pushing to achieve those objectives, because it can easily become kind of hostile. I've seen it, you've seen it within these communities, like Graphene OS versus Calyx OS as an example. It's like, oh geez, here we go. It's like we're all trying to work towards like a common goal here, but sometimes ego and personality and gets in the way. So I definitely don't want to come across like that at all, 100%. I'm just very passionate, and I appreciate other people who are passionate too. I just sometimes get, I don't really know, I guess just kind of annoyed, but in a good way, in a healthy way, not in a antagonistic kind of a way. It's more just kind of like, hey, let's talk about this, because I listen to certain people. I know you listen to Bazell, or you're familiar with him, and there's a lot of things I
Yeah.
listen to, and I thought to myself like, geez, like, okay, but because his context, his daily routines are working with people who are trying to be ultra secret, ultra private, buying houses and trusts and registering cars and trusts and setting up completely anonymous lives and stuff. And I'm like, dude, that's not really me. Like, I maybe one day could get there, but I don't really have the passion to do that right now. But I do have the passion around some of these other projects and ideas, because I think that they're more, I think they're like, they have a better chance of meeting people where they are, as opposed to just preaching to the choir.
Yeah, that's the fact that you mentioned what's his name?
Mike
Bazell or
Basil Bazell. I'm not really sure. It's
I
probably not even his
yeah,
real name. So, but yeah,
yeah,
you Basil, yeah, Mike
yeah.
Basil.
I Bazell, that probably sounds right. So I've read his books and listened to his podcast. It's pretty amazing. I sort of don't like the idea that this trust setup and LLC setup, that's actually not really open to that many people. Like, you kind of have to be pretty well off to be able to pull this off, and in many cases, people are just gonna have to move. And like, who does that?
Or yeah,
Like, who
move and
has
start
the
over. Yeah, exactly. Like, well,
yeah,
I've already bought a house. I already have a mortgage. It's already
yeah,
public record. I guess I'm screwed now. Right.
yeah. And it's that's not to like discredit Michael at all, but it's just like it's not for everyone, and I would love it for it to be for everyone, but um, I kind of feel that his advice is mostly like for those people that actually can afford this and have the means to actually hire a law firm to do all these things correctly, so that they don't get their heads bashed in by the IRS agents because they did something incorrectly, and now
Right.
they are under some tax fraud investigation because of that. Because that can happen. That's part of that. Like if you are completely anonymous, you're probably doing things illegal, because at some point you are going to have to be exposed to surveillance. If you are using the US dollar, that's the biggest surveillance network in the world, because that requires taxation. You have to report your income. You have to have that reported to the IRS. You have to tax that, and every single bill is marked. Every single transaction is marked. So, unless you're completely off the grid, which I guess almost no one is, then you are going to have to expose yourself to some sort of surveillance. So I think Michael Basil's setup is actually pretty unfair to most people. But then I actually like what Graphene OS is doing, and not Michael, Daniel
Daniel
McKay
McKay.
is
Yeah.
doing. Yeah, because he's going super hardcore as well, but he's doing it in a way that is achievable by I would say pretty much anyone. Like
Right.
Like the installation process can be a bit daunting if you're like, hey, what is this? Is this a command line? Am I gonna break my device? And but if you can bite through that, it's over. Like you don't have to learn anything new by using Graphene OS, and you have the best security and privacy that you can ever hope to get from any particular device. So I really love that we have different approaches that work for different people, and we should be continuously working on creating even more new approaches so that more people can actually find, oh, this works for me. This is actually more personalized to my experience, so I can adapt this particular guide or device better than what I would find somewhere else. So I actually like what we are doing here. I actually like what you're doing, because with your podcast, you've actually made a couple of episodes that are pretty relevant to many people that are just trying to take the right steps, that are trying to start that journey. And I think you did in a pretty enjoyable way as well. So I would actually encourage more people to do this, to create content. If you have any sort of experience or whatever, put your stuff out there and help people find a way to this, because the way I'm doing things, it might work for some people, but it might not work for most. Maybe the way others that are already out there in the scene, it's gonna be the more of us there are, the better, I would say.
I totally agree, and I appreciate that. And on the topic of Graphene OS, from our last conversation, the last podcast we did together, the next day or that night, actually, I can't remember for sure, but within 24 hours of finishing that episode with you, I switched back to Graphene OS, and I have to say, I am so thoroughly impressed with this current build. Running on a Pixel 6 Pro, the experience is by far and away way better than I had with Calyx OS. And it's not to put Calyx OS down or the project, not at all, not at all. But using Google Play services in a sandboxed environment, that the way Graphene OS is set up, has been so much more usable than what Calyx uses with Micro G. And being able to say, have those sandboxed applications and everything is really easy and amazing. And I will also say that this is the first time I've used the web installer that Graphene OS has on their website, which makes it super easy to install. You do not even have to go to a command line anymore. And use ADB or anything like that. As long as you're following the instructions, your phone is factory unlocked, and you've enabled developer options, and then it just steps you right through. You've got your OEM debugging and OEM unlocking and your USB debugging enabled. Boom, you plug it in. Obviously, back up all your stuff first. Plug it in and just click the buttons on the web page, and it worked. It worked flawlessly. I was like, I was just literally sat back like, wow, this is way too easy now. This is awesome. And which is good.
Oh yeah.
Because we need it to be easy as possible for people to not be intimidated or fearful to try this stuff out. And wow. I was just wanted to throw that in there because
yeah, but people really need to appreciate how amazing this is, because you can get the most secure operating system on the planet, at least like consumer grade operating system, at least from what we know,
correct,
from the declassified systems.
Sure.
That is so easy to install and so easy to use that literally anyone can do this. If you can use an Android phone or an iPhone, you can use Graphene OS, and Graphene OS is going to give you such an amazing amount of privacy and security features that you would not find anywhere else in any single project. And Graphene OS just keeps pushing the bar further and further. They are not done. They just keep improving further and further, and they in their roadmap, their goals are in the stars. They are already in the moon, and they just keep going further. And I'm just so excited that, we are going to be having these projects continuously giving us better features, better usability. We are going to have more privacy and security this way, more anonymity as well. And it's not so doom and gloom that a lot of the sentiment in the community is that, well, it's over because the internet is centralized and now everything is controlled by the big tech and there's nothing
Yeah.
to do.
It,
Yeah.
that can weigh on people. It's weighed on me at different times. Like, gosh, why am I even doing this? Like, I go as far as thinking like, well, if I'm ever a target, I'm screwed anyway, because all they're going to do is like fire up Pegasus from the NSO group anyways, and just 0-day my ass from whatever, and it's like, you can get really dystopian about it. And it's like, whoa, like, try to calm down here. It's like, you're, like you said, it's not that it's not worth doing. It definitely is worth doing. And it's very empowering. It's like growing your own food. Like if you have a garden or you have farm animals or anything, it's like, yeah, you still rely on some other food sources for sure. You can't grow all the things, right? Or maybe some people can, but generally, it's like getting plugged into like a co-op or buying shares from like a raw milk farmer, farm, or going in with your friends or family to buy a cow if you eat meat, from locally sourced. Like anytime you take these steps, it's like, is that more convenient? Definitely not. But is it more rewarding? Like, yeah, it's more rewarding when you are connected with your food source. If you're I used to buy from a co-op vegetables and things, and now we grow a lot of our own and hydroponics and doing a lot of fun things. So it's like, it's not that necessarily it's more cost effective. It's generally more expensive. And in this case, expense is more like your time. You're going to spend a little more time investing into this stuff, but it pays back in dividends. It can be very rewarding, and it can be exciting, and it doesn't have to be so dark, depressing, dystopian, even though that's kind of in the back of our minds, or at least for myself, where I'm kind of like trying, like, that's what fuels me, is like, man, screw these big tech companies. I'm not going to let them take, it's like you kind of like, you're fighting back. And I think everyone is probably in a little bit different place where they feel like, if this is like a sliding scale, like a pendulum going from one side extreme to the other extreme, I kind of fall like, not necessarily in the middle, probably more to like the secretive extreme, but at the same time, like, I'm still trying to have a good time, right? Like, let's have a good time with this. Like, let's have fun. You can connect with a lot of people on this, regardless of like political belief or religion or science or any of this stuff. Like, it's like this little area where you can just kind of come together and say like, no, this is wrong. I agree that's wrong. You agree it's wrong. Like, this corporate surveillance, mass surveillance, government surveillance. So like, what can we do to fight back? And I think that's what where a lot of people find themselves, in that kind of convergence. You definitely have people who are more extreme, for sure. Mike Basil, he's definitely on that extreme side. That pendulum's kind of pushed further all the way to the other side. I'm not there. Maybe one day I'll be there. I mean, it depends on how the world goes. But for right now, it's like, let's just find this cool, comfortable area where people can just kind of get started, and then they can get as extreme as they want to, but then they'll be equipped with like some knowledge and some tools and some basic skills to then start honing that craft, and becoming kind of more of an expert in their own way. But you kind of have to start somewhere, and that's generally where I'm trying to find people. And this does bleed over into other things like crypto. Like, I find that the privacy space does span across the crypto space quite a bit, at least like on Twitter. And that's kind of where I'm looking at things. I'm looking for news information. I'm following different things. Or just because there's a lot of things that have to do with either data leaks or hacks or scams and other things that most people are familiar with crypto, because most ransoms are asked for in crypto these days more than anything else. So there's some kind of, there's some good knowledge sets to have around cryptocurrency, even if you don't use it like in your daily life or anything. It's just to understand about it, because a lot of people who move to decentralized tool sets and software applications are generally also kind of like leaning towards that decentralized, currency as well, because it is kind of a natural next step. If you think about censorship, is how can I support things Graphene OS is a great example, right? Like, how can I support Graphene OS without divulging my personal identification, my information? Oh, I could send them some Monero to support them, or Bitcoin. Like, okay, cool. I want to do that. I want to support that, right? So I guess that's kind of, we don't have to go down crypto paths. I'm just saying that it kind of allows for more projects to be funded, or initiatives, whether it's non-government organizations or whether it's a nonprofit somewhere that you want to contribute to. Because I think that's, like, we touched on that quite a bit in our previous episode, was being an activist and contributing with either your time or your treasure, your time or your talent, or your money, right? Money in the form of, well, in a lot of cases, is crypto for donations. So, and another reason to use de-Googled Android devices is, if you're going to keep crypto on your phone, I would highly suggest doing that on something that isn't being surveilled. So it's just my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty good 2 cents. I actually wanted to say that your approach on the podcast have been really like taking your listener through the privacy journey step by step, sort of holding their hand and doing one thing at a time. Whereas my approach used to be more hardlined, more like you have to do these things like sort of all at once, I guess. I don't know. That's how I transitioned into this arena. I sort of like switched to full privacy overnight, mostly over the span of a few days to weeks. I went from using Windows and having a Facebook account to deleting my Facebook account, installing Linux, and transitioning to all of these decentralized open source projects. And that's mostly because of the Snowden leaks. That's how I started. But I was always weird, so that's not everybody. And some people need a maybe slower approach. Maybe they need more time. Maybe they don't actually have um, the resources to actually dedicate so much attention to transitioning so fast to extreme privacy,
Right.
because they have so many other things that they are going through in their life. And uh, I actually, enjoy that you're taking that slower approach, one episode at a time. That's actually very useful for a lot of people. And some people, they actually might enjoy that faster, more hardline approach, and that's fine as well. So what I'm trying to say basically is that, kind of like in the diet industry, there are a lot of zealots. They'll tell you, well, if you are not paleo, then you're killing yourself. If you're not vegan, then you're killing the planet. If you are not carnivore, then I don't know what those people are saying. But there are always these camps of people arguing against each other, and none of them are right, because the science doesn't support any of them. Science tells you that all of the diets, they're gonna fail in 95% of the cases. And what we should do is that we should embrace diversity. We should embrace that what works for individuals, that's what they should do. So if that's for you, that's for you specifically, actually, that's self-hosting. You really like that, and you approach many of the things that you do via that self-hosting experience. And that's admirable, but that's maybe not doable for everyone else. You like that, you enjoy doing that. It's also a hobby for you. And someone actually in the comments said that self-hosting is great because you actually learn a lot about this technology. You learn about servers and networking and Linux and security that way as well. So that's awesome. You can actually build your career slowly off of this if you go deep enough. But that's maybe not for everyone. Maybe some people just don't want to spend that much time on this, and they don't want to be told that whatever they're doing is wrong just because it's not the hardcore version of the most private and secure setup that can be conceived of. So I'm probably just repeating myself, but
No,
I think it needs to be
that's all.
understood. Yeah.
That's a very good point. And I'm actually the type of person that finds your content very appealing, the hard line, the kind of information through fire hose, because it covers a lot of different things that I'm not always thinking about in a very short amount of time. And then I can kind of go off and start doing some more research in some of the specific topics or bullet points that you're highlighting throughout your video. And then I can then say like, okay, cool, how does this fit into my lifestyle, and let me implement this. I'm like you, I was triggered by the Snowden leaks. I didn't do what you did. I had already been actually using Linux. I was a Unix admin previously, so I was using Linux already, but I wasn't using it because of the Snowden leaks. I was already, and to give some background, like I have quite a bit of experience with a lot of these things from my career. So I don't want anybody to think like, oh gosh, how do I become like this expert overnight? Like definitely it's not like, something that you acquire these skills in a day or a week. Now for you, you might have, been motivated. So you're able to switch over to Linux from Windows really quickly, which is a challenge. It's a lot easier now, but it wasn't so easy 9 years ago, So, I will say that a lot of these like challenges, these technical challenges, have been mitigated with the rapid development of open source software. It's pretty amazing actually how far it's come and where it's going. And like you said, there are great projects like Graphene OS, like a lot of these major Linux distributions, and open source software applications that are constantly being updated and patched and released, which just makes it even that much more pleasurable to use these tools. But there are definitely some learning curves depending upon how far you want to go, especially when you start going into the server side or infrastructure of things. Though with tools like Docker and self pre-built like Raspberry Pi images, it definitely is easier, but you still does require some technical know-how and desire to learn. Just that aptitude should exist for you to be successful. But I try to also cater to not mainly, but to people who are just totally intimidated. Like they just don't have any clue, what to do, where to start. And so even if they're still using their iPhone or a vanilla Android device, or they're using Windows or whatever, it's like, well, just start with one thing, whether it's a password manager, whether it's enabling two-factor authentication, or slowly moving away from a Gmail account, just signing up with Tutanota or Proton Mail or LavaBit, or just something else that's privacy respecting, and taking all of your eggs and distributing them in different baskets so you don't have a single point of threat, so to speak. So, and I know like in the beginning of this episode, we were kind of talking on a higher level on a topic that may not resonate with people who are starting there, but it's important to also kind of talk about that, because I want people to understand that like communication as we see today, by and large, is all centralized through email, centralized communication, whether it's text or voice. And that's really like what I'm trying to get away from, because again, those are ran by not our governments, but they're ran by for-profit companies, corporations. And that's big tech. And that goes back to our threat model conversation of corporate surveillance. So that's ultimately usually what I'm referring to try to get away from. And I really like how this community has been growing. There's some new people I've seen on YouTube making content. You can still count them on probably two hands, but they're growing. It's not a very sexy topic, right? It's like it can be fun, and you can kind of try to make it sexy, but it's not really sexy. It's kind of looked at as kind of dry and unfortunately kind of boring for a lot of people probably. So it's neat to see creators like yourself that you've been doing for several years now, and other creators that are making content around this topic. It's cool to see that it's getting more legs, getting more traction, and I see the view counts are going higher collectively, and more podcasts and things like that. So I think it's really going to take like a lot more. Like this is kind of to support your statement earlier, like, hey, more people need to make content, do a podcast, make videos, write tutorials, write guides. That's really what it's going to take, along with the advocacy and the support. I think all of these things have to happen in order for us to kind of get to the next level where we could have realistic conversations about a true peer-to-peer system, like, you know, the hated network.
Yeah. I to be clear, I'm not even sure that's possible, but yeah,
It may not
I
be.
just
It
hope.
may not be, but maybe it's close. I mean, maybe, you know, and I I feel like it kind of exists through multiple different applications right now, sort of, kind of haphazardly, but to have it really adopted at scale, like it definitely has to be something more polished, and that's a big ask right now. Again, a lot of these people are volunteers who write this software and write updates and fix bugs. And these development teams are pretty small. And oftentimes they're faced with either having to make the decisions of like, do we patch some bugs or do we write some new features? Well, we need newer features to get more users on board. But the more users we bring on board, it's more important to have those bugs fixed. So it's just a constant, you know, weighing out pros and cons on these software teams, just like weighing anything else out, like threat models, right? So I get that it's not easy, and we just say on this podcast like, oh, I want and I wish we had, and all these other things, but it does take a lot of work. And I plan on looking into Cwtch a little bit more. I would like to look into the organization behind them and see what after trying it out, seeing if it's something viable to maybe replace maybe Signal or something else. I don't know, but if people like these apps, it's also important to remember to advocate for it and to support them if they can, because that's how we'll get to the end game. I know it's a moving target, but we're on the
Yeah.
moon with graphene, so stars is the next stop.
Yeah. It is. I think it is quite easy for people to forget that the software doesn't write itself, and that actually somebody had to spend time, not just writing the code, but also designing the UI and rereading that code multiple times over and over, finding bugs and fixing bugs, and figuring out what's wrong with the code. It's a pretty frustrating job. It's not as easy as it sounds, and if you have an app that looks beautiful and it works more or less, and it gives you a feature, a lot of talent went into that, and a lot of hard work went into that, and people need to appreciate this, especially if it's free, and not free as in Facebook free, but free as in Cwtch free or Briar free. These are completely open source projects. They are not free as in you don't have to pay for them, but you can actually just take the code and use it yourself. Anyone can do that. They are literally just giving away all of their work for free. And this is something that's actually like pretty baffling to me, that we have these competing business models, and somehow, and despite the fact that you have multi-billion-dollar corporations like Google or Apple that have an incredibly talented engineers that they are actively, developing the software. They are paying them a lot of money to do that, versus small projects that are in many cases, as you said, volunteer run, or even if they are paid projects like Graphene OS, they're still a lot smaller than the entire Android project that's run mostly by Google. And nonetheless, Graphene OS is kicking everyone's ass because they are doing such an incredible job, and they're releasing all of their labor, like essentially for free. Like they are getting paid because they get the donations, but without donations, there probably wouldn't be Graphene OS. So, as we said in the last episode, and I think we should be repeating this message over and over.
Yeah.
We should normalize people donating and paying for the software, even if they don't have to.
And it's even bigger than that. I mean, now you're talking about $1 trillion market valuations for some of these tech
Oh yeah.
companies. Apple's approaching 3 trillion. Alphabet's, $1 trillion now. You got Microsoft. You've got this exclusive club of Google Apple, and Microsoft that are combined worth trillions of dollars. So their resources are far and away like superior to anything else on the planet. So let that kind of be the contrast when you're looking at these really small projects, these guys and girls and people, individuals. I don't want to, isolate anybody, but it's like, are doing things in their free time, or maybe they're living off donations, and it's, they're not driving Teslas and Lambos. They're just really in it for the project. And so that's why I really implore people to, you know, find a favorite project each month and give them $5 or $10 or $20 or $50, whatever you can afford. If you can afford a Netflix subscription, you can afford to support your favorite open source app once a month. Pick a different one and donate to them, because that really helps. And it also is an indicator for those projects that how well received it is, and how it really motivates them to keep fixing bugs and adding new features. And if they get enough donations, or if they get enough paid subscription models, like Bitwarden, offers for free, but you can also pay for it. These types of things, it also allows them to hire more engineers to, kind of scale their operations, which that's what we needed. It'll be a collective. It'll be a sum of all of these different kind of projects that we really need to ensure success and transition away from big tech companies that so many people rely on to basically supply all the services that they've been used to getting for free, as in free access, but not free as in access to code, but free to use. But now, as everyone says and knows, you are the product when you're using those free services. So, yeah, I like, trying to keep that on the forefront of people's thoughts, because it's easy to just be like, oh, cool, I can just download this app and use this front end, and cool, I can just use it and it's free. It's like, well, someone's got to pay for it and someone's building the code. Doesn't mean that, you should feel guilty for not paying for stuff. I mean, a lot of people are in different positions financially, but if you can, then you should, is my point. Or if you're a
Yeah, that's
developer or a designer, find ways to contribute through their GitHub page or GitLab or whatever they're using. Um,
yeah. All these people that are working on these projects, they could be easily multi-millionaires if they just joined a corporation and climbed that career ladder, and they could be living extremely comfortable lives, and like they wouldn't have to worry about any of the stuff that they are going through right now. And they sacrifice, a lot of these people, they sacrifice lucrative salaries, lucrative career paths, just because they believed in something bigger than a monetary incentive. And they wanted to create a project that would actually solve problems that corporate incentive doesn't solve and doesn't address at all. So like I really admire this, and we should really like normalize and encourage people to 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 be willing to donate at least $1 or at least any amount of money that they can, because if we don't do this, then the software is not going to be out there, because these corporations, they're not going to give it out for us for free. They have the shareholders to satisfy their needs, and their only need is to make more money. But when you look at nonprofit projects like Briar, like Open Privacy that makes Cwtch, the Graphenoise is also a nonprofit organization. They're not incentivized by becoming millionaires by owning Teslas and mansions and whatever. They actually want to do something greater, and I find that to be pretty admirable, because it kind of like defeats all this egocentric and self-centric nature that is prevalent in modern society with how things are running. And I think that actually this is actually how we can win this, how we can actually build a sort of utopia, whatever it's gonna look like in the future. I don't actually believe in any utopia. Like, I don't actually believe that would actually live in a utopian world, but I don't know what other word to use. But I just want to see hope. I want to see a way out of this mistake that we have made with re-centralizing the internet. And I think there is a way out, and it's in these projects. So I just wanted to ask you, do you also want to cover some of the different topics for today's episode, or
Sure.
um,
Yeah.
okay? So this is actually connected to the threat models that we've been discussing, but I always wonder about that initial question, that how do you what do you tell someone that just wants to start with this? Like, what do you think is the most important, or the first step that someone would tell you? Like, if I came to you and I said, like, hey, so here's my Samsung, what should I do? Like, what's the first thing that I can do to have a little bit more privacy? What would you tell me?
The first thing I would recommend is, before trying to convince them to flash their phone with a different ROM or anything like that, is to identify the different ways they communicate the most. So most people are going to like look at text messaging or some sort of Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp type of application, and email, because I think that the more you can break out and separate those things, and using them, whether, I know email is kind of a mixed bag, because people will say, well, it's not encrypted if you're sending it to a non-encrypted email. And that's true. That's a good point. But I would say the basic things, if you had a Samsung and you wanted to try to be a little bit more private and secure, is to download an alternative communication application like Session or Signal. Signal is probably a little easier. There's more people there that your friends are probably already using it. Look at signing up for a different email through Tutanota, ProtonMail, LavaBit, just to name a few, and use a password manager, whether it's Bitwarden or KeePassXC. Those are the two I usually recommend. Just start there, those three things. And then possibly the next thing would be something like Simple Login for email aliasing, to help start obscuring their true identity, or linking things that they do online when they create an account somewhere. And then start going and slowly changing their accounts and making sure they have a different, unique password for each of those logins. And they could do that all from their phone. And that would be kind of like the very first thing I would do, because now your communication is now encrypted, and encrypted if you're using Signal or Session. And then your email, you're separating that, because I'm assuming you probably have a Gmail account. If it's the Samsung, you probably logged in with your Google account. You're using the Gmail account as well. Set up another separate one, right? And then email aliasing to start obscuring that, and then having a password manager to start making sure that you have a unique password for every login, because it's more likely that you will become a victim because of a data leak and having your credentials exploited than it will be you being directly a target by a hacker or a nation state. Like, that's kind of like where I start, is that your identity might be used, or one of your accounts will be compromised because you used the same password on 20 websites, and one of those sites got compromised. And so now those hackers are running scripts to try that, those credentials on hundreds of websites across the web. And if they get in, now you're getting more compromised. So that's a very big security risk to you. If you want to take it one step further, would be to implement some kind of two-factor authentication on top of using a password manager, because then that would also help ensure that even if your credentials were leaked from a particular website, that script running to test those credentials across sites would only get them to a point of asking for the 2FA. That's where you're going to stop it dead in its tracks. Does it make you 100% secure? No, but it does help. You're making yourself a really small target, is what you're trying to do. And those are things you can do without switching to Linux, without installing Lineage or Graphene or whatever. These are just like a few just basic things that you could start doing like right away. Is email your instant messaging app. Stop using the Facebook Messenger. I'm not even telling you to go delete your Facebook. Just stop using Facebook Messenger, and then be an advocate to tell your friends, hey, if you want to talk to me, if you're not texting me, then talk to me on Signal or Session. And if you're not going to talk to me there, then like, sorry, I guess we're not going to talk. At some point you have to draw a line. I know that's kind of mean, but like, that's just how I feel about it. Yeah, that is just me though, and I know not everyone's there, but that would be my initial recommendation.
Yeah, that's actually pretty cool, and I think there's even one easier step that you can tell someone that if they don't really have that much time to listen to you and understand what you're saying, is well maybe just change the privacy settings. Maybe go through all of the accounts that you have, all of the devices that you have, and harden the privacy settings that are out there. Just opt out of everything you can opt out of, and that's actually it's not like something that's gonna drastically limit your exposure, but those
It's a
privacy
huge
settings,
step
if
though, like limiting
yeah,
your privacy. You just go in your privacy settings, limit your location access and things like that. And harden, yeah, you're 100% right. That would be
yeah,
a great thing to do, and that's something you could do with a few swipes and a couple toggle switches.
exactly. And you don't have to read the privacy policies or whatever. You can find these mostly in any sort of security or privacy settings in most of the apps that are out there, and even on your devices. You can do this on your Apple device, on your Android device. You have to do this for your accounts as well. But this is something that you can easily remember, that okay, well, I have a Facebook account, so I have to go to the Facebook account profile settings or whatever. I have to go to my Google account settings. I have to go to my device settings, and you can do this one step at a time. You don't have to rush through this. And once you're ready, you can go somewhere else. And I actually like that you actually mentioned Signal, because I think that like the most three most sensitive data points about you are actually your social graph. So that would actually cover messaging like Signal, and then it would be your searches, your search queries that you type into Google, and your browser history, your browser records, because those two actually reveal a lot about your thoughts, about your problems that you're facing. Like if you're typing your health queries into Google, then Google is gonna record that, and they're gonna use that for health insurance profiles or something like that. So a lot of things are actually pretty sensitive that you can limit your exposure of very easily just by switching to products that don't require you to go through any setup. So, for example, you would just install DuckDuckGo browser app for Android, and that could already kill two birds with one stone, because you would be protecting your browser records from like your main browser that would be on your phone. So that would be maybe Google Chrome or maybe some sort of Samsung browser. And you would be using DuckDuckGo search engine to protect your searches from Google, Bing, Yahoo, if anyone uses Yahoo. and I would say I would suggest maybe Tor browser, because you get that IP protection of your IP address, and even your internet service provider is not gonna know what websites you go to. I'm not sure how easy that step is for people. I think it is easy for me because it's just downloading the browser, but it's true that Tor is slower, so you might not be able to use it for all kinds of traffic, but maybe just reading the news, doing those health searches, maybe looking up some information about news and politics, and maybe some research. That could be good. So like I would say maybe take the step that is the easiest for you to do. So it could be installing Signal, it could be switching to DuckDuckGo, it could be switching to Tutanota or ProtonMail. Anything that you can think you can do easily, I think that should be your first step. And you should be thinking about this through the mindset of compartmentalization, like trying to, I think you also mentioned this, like do not put all of your eggs into one basket. So you want to remove those eggs one at a time. You probably don't want to, do all of them at once, because you might break them. So one at a time, take an egg and put it in a secure location. And this is what you're doing if you install Signal, if you use DuckDuckGo, if you use Tor, and all these other services that you also mentioned.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good analogy, and I agree with that. I think that it's even more simplified if you start with the device settings and changing the privacy information, changing your default search, and using your communication. That like definitely breaks the social graph as information being collected on you specifically based on your user ID or your device ID right away. And the thing of it is that once you make that change and a few weeks goes by and you're kind of using these different apps, you start thinking like, wow, this is actually really easy. And actually you might find some benefits that you like that you weren't taking advantage of before. And so then it's like, well, what's next? Like, what else can I do? And that's when you start unraveling that onion, those layers start coming off, and you start getting sucked into podcasts in the middle of the night and like, trying to find a way to get a pixel or something. But, I definitely don't want to intimidate people into thinking like that's where you got to start, because sometimes I make some assumptions about where people are in their journey. And I think that that's a really good starting place is, what do you do with the phone in your pocket right now? If it's a Samsung, if it's an iPhone, I mean, you can even accomplish some of these with an iPhone. Stop using iMessage, use Signal, and you can change your default browser. Fortunately, now you didn't used to be able to do that, but now you can. So download Brave or DuckDuckGo, something that's more privacy respecting, that's not going to be tracking your searches, like you said. And then next thing would be email. I tend to jump right to use a password manager, kind of a thing. But I kind of feel like the password manager is it's almost, in my opinion, it's almost one of the most critical things, because it's not a matter of if any of the websites or services you've signed up for have been hacked or will be hacked. They will be hacked, or there will be a leak. It will happen. You can bank on it. And when that happens, how will you feel? Will you be intimidated, scared, or will you think like, crap, there was a breach on this website 6 months ago? Crap, I never changed my password, but I have two-factor authentication at least. So at least maybe, no one's compromised my account. That's kind of where my brain goes. But I think because I'm just looking at all this stuff all the time, like I said, I have my news feed set up. I actually, on my Nextcloud server, use the Reader, which if anyone ever used Google Reader back in the day, it's kind of like having that, but you host it yourself. So you can just throw RSS feeds in there, and you can categorize them and group them around. So you can kind of read headlines and articles really quickly. It's just a news aggregator. But because I'm in that all the time, I'm seeing all these data leaks. There's certain Twitter accounts that, will paste like ghost bins or paste bin URLs that I'll go and check out. And it's just amazing to me how much data is out there just floating around on the ClearNet for anyone to access. I'm not even talking about darknet forums. I'm not even talking about raid forums or anything. I'm talking about just what's out there if you just know what the URL is. It's pretty baffling to me. Not to scare people, but you should be kind of scared. Like you should definitely like incorporate, if nothing else, like for your own security purposes and your identity, just at least be privy to knowing that these things are happening all the time. And so being vigilant about that will only help you, right? So we do these things not just because we're nerds. We do these things because it's a kind of a dark, evil place out there on the web.
Oh yeah, it's the best approach to security is to assume that you are eventually going to get breached and your security layers are just not going to suffice, and the attacker is going to be able to make it through. And you have to adapt to that. So you have to have a scenario for what you're going to do when the attacker is already in, and what measures you can take right now before the attacker is in that can make that exploitation a lot harder for the attacker. So one of the things that you should do is that you should make sure that whatever the attacker could get access to is as meaningless as possible, so that they cannot actually abuse your information. That means that you have to rely on strong encryption and preferably end-to-end encryption, which means that you control the keys to the encryption and not the service that you're using. So that means that if you're using Google Cloud or I think it's called Google Drive or Apple iCloud for your data, you should not trust that a breach will never happen. You should assume that a breach will happen, and the best way to prepare for a breach of a central database is to encrypt your own data. And you can do that with many different apps that are out there. You can do that with Cryptomatter. You can do that with Veracrypt. Whatever is easier for you, you can go. You can just go and grab that app and just go for it. And the thing is that the world is evil. There's always going to be someone who's going to try to exploit that. This is the nature of the internet. It's really global. This is one of the most beautiful things about the internet, is that it really unites us as a species, because it's the same standard and the same protocols used across the world on all continents, in all countries. It's the same technology that can communicate with every single device on the planet. And that's beautiful, but it also means that all of the criminals that are out there in all of these countries, everywhere in the world, they can attack any victim in any place, and there's no jurisdiction that is going to be able to go after them. If you live in Norway, an attacker from Mongolia could attack your server, right? So this is the level of exposure that we have with the beautiful convenience of the internet. So a breach will always happen, and assume that it will happen to you as well, and prepare for that. It's not to scare you away. It's just to acknowledge the reality of things.
Yeah, I never really thought about it like that, but it's true. If you think about technology before the internet, the proliferation of the internet, you had a lot of different manufacturers trying to be the standard, whether it was VHS or Betamax or HD DVD versus Blu-ray. There's always been a fight for a format, a proprietary format, and the internet being so open and standardized is pretty amazing, because then it really expands the connection for people and for commerce and other ideas to be shared. So it's not just to be a scary thing. I definitely don't want to make people feel like, oh my gosh, like I'm so screwed. It's like, no, just you start thinking about it, and it just changes the way that you process things when you sign up for new services. Another great exercise that I highly recommend people to do is literally open a notepad and take a pen or pencil, whatever, and write down every app that's on your phone, every single one. Whether it's the stupid game you downloaded for 5 minutes and never played again, or it's an app like your email app that you use, 50 times a day. Write them down, because it's an interesting exercise, because what you find is you're taking inventory, is that there's going to be a large percentage of those apps that you could just nuke off your phone. And you can really, like, the fewer apps you have, the better. Most great websites that have front-end apps also have very good progressive web apps, meaning that the app performs almost as good, and sometimes even better, to me, it seems like, in a browser than it does in the native app. Like Twitter is a great example. The Twitter web app actually works incredibly well. So if you take an inventory of all the apps on your device that might be stealing, clipboard information, or who knows, even if they're not, it's just good practice to do some house cleaning once or twice a year, and get rid of things that you don't need. If there's an account, delete that account, then delete the app. Usually it's pretty easy process. It just emails you a link to verify that you want to close it. It's another area where you can just start slowly closing your footprint of where your data exists, and getting apps off your phone that don't need to be there.
Yeah, this is actually a pretty good point, because I think we could call this process attack surface reduction. Basically, when you install an app, you are running someone else's code on your phone, and that code can have vulnerabilities in it that can be exploited by hackers. So even if you have like the most secure phone on the planet, if you install a malicious app in it, yeah, the phone is gonna that most secure phone is gonna do a good job trying to prevent damage, but still that code can be exploited. And there's actually a pretty interesting story of how Facebook used $1.5 million to find an exploit in Tails. So Tails is the Amnesia Incognito Live system. It's basically a Tor operating system that's running everything through the Tor network. And they found an exploit in Tails based on which they could attack a predator that they were going after. And the exploit that they found was actually in a VLC media player that was running in Tails. So it wasn't an exploit in Tor, it wasn't an exploit in Tails, it was an exploit in an application that Tails used to open media files. And that's actually pretty amazing that such a ubiquitous thing as a media player can actually compromise your security setup. So
That is
yeah, certainly.
mind-boggling. I did not even know that. I just go, or I actually use Start Page. I say Google. I need to break that habit. I searched. I searched for this, uh, and yeah, that's crazy. What Tails is probably such a small, super small percentage of the population using that operating system. It's a live distribution that runs on a USB. When you pull it out, it erases anything from memory. So it's very important for like journalists and dissidents to have something like that. And the fact that they spend money to develop or find an exploit is mind-boggling. That in itself should tell you a reason to not use a service like Facebook. That is straight. That is straight evil.
I mean, in that particular case, it was pretty targeted against a person that kind of deserved that. Um, but it's kind of like it was more to the point like okay, so they couldn't break Tails, they couldn't break the encryption of Tails or Tor, but they could break VLC Media Player. So
Right.
uh,
Right.
as you said, if you install that stupid app or stupid game on the phone that you never play, that app is going to be a point of vulnerability on your phone. So, like be minimalist and use keep only those apps that you actually need and use, and try to reduce the number of apps that are on your phone. Now, this can be sort of counterproductive to the compartmentalization point that we raised earlier, but it sort of needs to balance that, right? So you don't want to put all of your eggs into one basket, but you also don't want to spread out so far that you have too many apps on your phone from too many projects and organizations behind those apps, that you don't actually know how serious they take the security of their software. So definitely, this is actually another good point, another good exercise that you can do. Very easy step. Just remove some of the apps that you don't use or don't need, and that alone will probably improve a lot of your security and privacy as well, because a lot of these apps are using SDKs, software development kits, which is basically just a bunch of code, again, that the app developers are using from someone else, usually something like Facebook or something, and it's usually to integrate tracking code inside the app. So even if you don't have Facebook installed on your phone, Facebook code, tracking code, could still be on your phone, tracking your phone activity, and you don't even have to have a Facebook account. You could have an account with that app or no account at all. That app will be withdrawing enough data from your phone so that Facebook could identify that it's you. They could see your IP address, maybe even your location, maybe your contacts, and you don't want to have that. So removing apps is another excellent privacy step that people oftentimes overlook, and it's pretty powerful.
Right. And that kind of dovetails into like people who use Facebook or Google accounts to log in to apps. So a lot of times like it's like, oh, you can sign up with your email or log in with your Facebook or Google ID. And people are like, oh, okay. Yeah, that's easy. And they just click that and they authorize it through their login. And now, that pixel's installed, or that Google tracking is probably able to see, what they're doing, because they're using that API for credential access from one of the big tech providers. And just I try to push people to like always use an email and a password, unique password, to sign up on those services, because there again too, now you have a single point of failure. If that account is breached or compromised, anywhere that you were using that Google or Facebook account to log in is now able to access all those accounts. It's just, it seems like common sense stuff, but it's really not. You really kind of have to make it people aware that these are kind of like the failure points. Yeah, it's I was just glossing that article. This is crazy. I mean, it was a 0-day exploit that they were able to have a video expose the real IP address of the person viewing the clip directly from VLC, even though they're using Tails, which is torrifying their traffic. That is some tricky stuff. That is some tricky stuff. Now, granted, I mean, the person that they were going after was someone who was definitely a bad actor, but the fact that, they worked with the FBI, they developed this, exploit, and basically it seems like they gave it to the FBI without acknowledging its existence to anyone else. It's kind of like where the shitty part of it is, but these things happen. So,
did you find how much money they spent on this?
I am looking for. I'm sure it was a lot. I didn't see it in a specific article, but let me see if this one had it on the CyberWire. I wanted to see if it had it. Yeah.
I think it was about $1.5 million.
Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah, I'm not finding the amount, but I'm finding some links to the article. It's pretty interesting. I did not know about that. So
yeah, it's an old one. I think it's from 2019, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. This article was in June of 2020, but it didn't say. It didn't. This particular one is behind a paywall, so I was trying to find another one. This article was written June 12th, 2020, but they probably were writing about it long after it happened.
Yeah.
So, and there's just some stuff on Vice too. FBI showed its more targeted methods to potentially de-anonymize Tor users. Yeah, and that one's from August 8th, 2017. So that's unrelated. But yeah, it basically just means that you're not, even if you're using Tails or you're using Hunix or something, like, there's still a chance if someone wants it bad enough, they're gonna find you. They go find you.
So, what's your take on this particular case? Like Facebook actually like helping out crack a Tails users' anonymity.
It's funny that Facebook got involved. I think that it looks like the FBI went to them looking, because they probably had some of the best engineers available. It says they paid a third-party contractor 6 figures to help develop a 0-day. So, I mean, and it's probably more than that. Even this particular article I'm reading on Schneider on security is a bit vague on the details. I guess here's the thing, right? Because I think you have mentioned before that you want to see law enforcement just do law enforcement work. I think that in this specific scenario, like, I don't have a serious problem with it, because they were going after a specific person who had been making threats and were trying to find a way to get to them. They didn't get to this person, Hernandez, I think is the name of the person, Buster Hernandez. They got this individual by hacking, but this person was a target, versus let's just surveil everyone, and when someone screws up, we'll go back into their time capsule and pull up everything they've ever done, find all the people all their cohorts. It's like I don't have as much of a problem when there's a target and they're doing real police work. And then I guess in this case, you could kind of say it was police work, and that they were basically trying to find a way or someone to write an exploit or not write an exploit, leverage an existing exploit. In this case, a 0-day with what appears to be VLC, that they could basically retrieve the real IP address by making sure that they were sending a modified video file to this actor, and it kind of like a canary token or something like that. I mean, that's police work. I would argue that that's
Yeah.
probably, it's kind of gray area in my book, but I guess if they're expending this amount of time and resources to find a specific person, and they're kind of going through unorthodox ways to get that information, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with that. Like, if they're working for it, but when they're just mass surveilling everyone all the time, is not when I'm not okay with it, because that's not police work. That's just surveillance capitalism, or not even capitalism. That's a surveillance state at that point. And then they have this, time machine to go back in time and see anyone that you've interacted with and all these different things, which most of that is irrelevant. It's just, I don't know. I think it's kind of a sticky area for a lot of people. I usually fall on the side of anti-surveillance. So, but in this case, I don't know. It does seem like some pretty lengthy, efforts to go to find this individual.
Yeah, it's definitely different than the NSA going to Microsoft and telling them, "Hey, don't fix this bug. We are actually weaponizing this for an exploit." And then
Yeah,
having that exploit leaked by shadow brokers,
right.
and then WannaCry happens.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of different feelings I have about that. And again, it's really every person's probably going to feel a little differently. I kind of lean more towards like the individual sovereignty, and the anarchist versus the surveillance state side. Or, well, if it saves one life, if it saves one person, it's like, yeah, at the expense of everyone basically having no freedom and being monitored and censoring themselves and being censored, then no. I mean, and that sounds terrible when you say like, oh, are you saying someone should die or be a criminal? It's like, well, no. But I mean, everyone has the freedom to choose their own path. And if they choose a path that's a criminal, eventually it's going to catch up with them, and eventually they're going to get caught. So why does everyone else need to suffer for the lack of real police work?
So, what's the gray area in your book in this? What's the dark part of this case? Because that's a pretty interesting one, and I never had a chance to
Yeah.
discuss this
So for
with
me, I
anyone.
think, and I think it's probably because I don't have all the details. Like, what was the relationship between the FBI and Facebook? Was it just because that Facebook had some engineers on staff that possessed the skill sets required to go after someone that was very difficult to find, or was it because there was already a pre-existing relationship that was just leveraged? So that essentially makes Facebook like an employee of the federal government. This is the FBI we're talking about. So, or
So,
a cohort, in data collection and analyzing things. That's the gray area for me. Is like I don't, like, is it just that they found this guy? He had the skill sets, so they offered him a private contract? I doubt it. I doubt it. I highly doubt it. Now, again, I don't have all the details, and maybe I could try to find out more information. Uh,
so
you know,
both of the things about Facebook and the relationship with the government are true. So Facebook does have a permanent relationship with the government when it comes to handing over Facebook data to the surveillance state. It's not just in the United States, it's in every government Facebook operates in, and it goes for the FBI and the NSA as well. But for this particular case, Facebook actually does have a security team that is working on external security projects and fighting threats, and that goes for like advanced persistent threats like heavy zero-day exploits, expensive stuff. They do have a security team for this, and they're actually pretty good. They actually have a pretty good record, considering how horrible Facebook is at securing its own data centers and its own network. their security team is actually doing a pretty good job
Sure.
for other stuff. So I
Well,
think,
and I guess, and I
yeah,
would argue that, I mean, these big tech companies probably have some of the best security on the planet. I mean, undoubtedly, Google, Facebook, Apple. Um, so
well, Google does, but Facebook not so much.
Facebook, not so much. No, you're right. I would say probably, Google's probably the top tier. I
Yeah,
don't know who would
definitely.
be next, but I mean, I'm sure Apple's pretty up there. Even though it's funny, right? Because Apple has even refused to, what was it, the Pensacola shooter, right? To unlock a phone for law enforcement. So it's like, was that just a publicity stunt to convince people that like privacy and security matter to Apple, or did they truly like actually say like, nah, we're not going to do that. We're not going to violate the terms of service. It's like sometimes I don't really know what to believe when it comes to law enforcement and the encryption battle or the surveillance battle, and big tech's being complicit or being positioned like, well, that violates the terms with our users, but we're going to do it anyways. But we're going to also try to make sure to tell them that like their privacy matters to us, yada, 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 the PR side of things. So I never really know what to believe. So I just generally believe that they're complicit.
So would you be less worried if it was some unknown third-party contractor who was paid the same amount of money to break into Tails and not Facebook?
It would make me feel better that they acquired the skill sets on their own. That would be police work, in my opinion. When I say
So
police
this is
work, I
not
mean,
police work?
I see. I don't know. I don't have all the details. I would say that it's kind
Okay.
of lazy. It's kind of lazy. It's like, well,
Okay.
and maybe from their perspective, it's a path of least resistance and it's the less resources required. So, okay, this is what we're going to do. We know Facebook, we already have this relationship. We probably already have our own API access to all their data through their own dashboards because Facebook built them for them. So they already have this like relationship. So they're probably thinking like, this is the path of least resistance. We know they have the engineers who actually have the skill sets required to hack this individual. I don't know. Are those two of the same thing? I don't think so, because I think that like they're basically leveraging a data, probably one of the largest, databases on the planet that tells people that you can be secure and private by having a few little checkbox that you can do in your private settings, but it don't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. It's all smoke and mirrors, in my opinion. I think it's all a joke. All of that stuff is a joke. Um, my honest advice is just don't use these platforms. And it's not because like you're going to be a criminal. I just don't use them because the association that you'll have with all of those contacts doesn't benefit. The ROI just isn't there. At least not for me. Like the ROI and what I say is what you get out of the experience for what the trade-off of all of that data collection is.
Yeah.
It's just like how's that worth it to people? I don't get it. But we're probably going down a completely different path from your original question.
Um, yeah, but I find this case to be actually pretty interesting because it is very strange that Facebook, out of all companies, would go after Tails. Like they actually were looking for a way to crack Tails. And that's weird because Facebook has nothing to do with Tails or Tor or VLC Media Player. Yet they went out of their way to help the law enforcement in the United States to solve their case for them, basically. So I think you do your concern is on point that this is a pretty strange relationship. There are plenty of companies that are solely focused on this. They are solely engineers that are breaking into other people's stuff, and that's
Sure.
how they
Eh,
make money.
yeah, bug
This is
bounty
not
programs and
Facebook.
things, but and those are done for profit, but also to ensure the viability of the platform or the software. I mean, one of the things in this article, this is what bothers me, is Facebook also never notified the Tails team of the flaw, breaking a long industry tradition of disclosure in which the relevant developers are notified of vulnerabilities in advance of them becoming public so they have a chance at implementing a fix. So sources told Vice that since an upcoming Tails update was slated to strip the vulnerable code, Facebook didn't bother to do so, though the social media company had no reason to believe Tails developers had ever discovered the bug. So it's like there's not even like they're in the sandbox with like this like mutual respect with other software companies, and they're just like, nah, fuck them. We're not going to tell them. You know, if this article's true, which I believe it to be, if it's still published, it doesn't. You know, so it's just like. So now you're complicit. Now you're complicit, and basically, what sets you any different from NSO Group? What makes you any different? Right?
It doesn't.
No, from an ethical standpoint, it doesn't, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So why would you want to do business with a company like that? By giving them your information, you know, it's just like I mean, again, these are two pretty serious zealots who are having a conversation on the internet right now, and so our line in the sand is probably very different from the average person out there. But that's how I look at this stuff, is like, why, you know, if you know, like, you look at these people who say like, oh, they find out like one of their favorite, you know, clothing brands is using slave labor in a third world country to make their clothing. And so what do? They boycott the clothing, right? Like, oh, how, you know, I'm not going to support a company like this. Well, where's, why does that not exist for software companies like Facebook, you know, like that's a pretty shitty thing to do.
Yeah, this is such an excellent point. Like, would you sign up for a social network that was created by the NSO Group, right?
Right. That basically have developers who might. This is just what we know about. This is just what, you know, an article of something that we can find. What else are they doing that we don't know about? And they haven't told, you know, that these other software companies like, hey, you have a 0-day exploit. We found it. You should patch it. I don't know. I mean, we will never know.
I'm pretty suspicious, but like I have like no evidence for this claim, but I'm pretty sure there is way more behind closed doors that gets to be reported.
Sure,
that never gets to be reported. I mean,
sure, absolutely. And when I say Facebook, I'm talking about all-encompassing, you know, applications. You know, WhatsApp and Instagram. You know, it's not just isolated to Facebook, and these apps are used all over the place. There's embeds. There's Facebook Pixel being. I mean, they're a surveillance company. That's how they make money. So, you know, within the context specifically, that's like you know, where they're paying. This contractor is a contractor inside Facebook to like, okay, so it sounds like there's some police work being done initiated by the FBI, but it's almost, it sounds more like a revolving door, or probably not even a door at all. It's just a huge pipe going back and forth. And, you know, it irritates me because again, asking like, what value do you get? Is it enough value for the trade-off of not even just having your data collected, but also supporting a company that is, you know, complicit in doing shady stuff? And it's not shady that an engineer found a bug, and it's not, you know, and that maybe they were able to use that to find a bad actor. It's shady that they had no intention of notifying either the Tails team or VLC or whoever, because, you know, if you try to hack into a company and try to find exploits, unless you're actually part of a bug bounty program, you will be prosecuted if found.
I mean, if you are not doing it on authority, then yeah.
That's what I mean. Yeah, not on authority. You're not part of a pen test team. You're not doing a bug bounty program. But, you know, they, meaning most of the three-letter agencies and the big tech companies that are complicit with them, are free to hack everybody on the planet with no recourse. None. So if that doesn't piss you off, and just that, if that doesn't frustrate you, you know, I don't really know what else would at that point.
So like FBI, you know, gets its budget from the taxpayers. So this is taxpayers' money that is being used to crack into someone's, you know, Tails installation. But this is a bug that actually like that could be usable for every installation that was currently in use. So
And
They
who
built,
uses Tails? I
yeah.
mean, I know they'll say, well, criminals use Tails. Come on, man. Criminals use Snapchat to sell drugs and Twitter, okay? Like, it's not
Yeah.
just, I hate that. I hate that answer when people, oh, just criminals, people, only people using Bitcoin are criminals. No, criminals love cash. That's what they use, cash, US dollars. That's what actually talks. I'm sure, yes, you can make a case. A lot of people are selling drugs on darknet markets. Absolutely, 100%. But by and large, they're using cash. Cash is what's king. And so, to look at who's using Tails, most people who know what Tails is are going to understand that they're going to be used by people who are trying to protect themselves from some sort of regime, or they're journalists, they're a source, they're doing something that's sensitive, that's not necessarily like drug related in any way. It's to get information out. It's to communicates actual truths that are happening, but the government doesn't have any interest. I don't mean to get conspiracy theorists about it, but it's like the government doesn't have any interest in making sure that the general populace has a way to get information out and communicate. I mean, hell, look, Snowden's been in hiding in Russia for almost a decade now because of that. They would rather have full open access to everything all the time, in real time, cataloged forever. So they're not. Am I surprised that they wouldn't notify or that they're doing that? Not at all. And I would never expect them to stop. And I would never expect them to stop using big tech companies who have all the talent to find more exploits.
I have never heard of any similar case. I've never heard of Google, giving their talent to the FBI or any other three-letter government agency.
Someone had to have leaked this. I mean, how else would it get out? I mean, there's no.
I don't know.
It's just interesting. I was trying to find a source. Like, did someone? And it's like, there's no a spokesperson for Facebook. Well, actually, it said a Facebook spokesperson told Vice there was. So there was a unique case because he was using such a sophisticated method to hide his identity. A sophisticated method, a live distro. Anyone can download from the internet, make it sound like he's like some sort of like super elite hacksaw, but. Took extraordinary steps of working with security experts to help the FBI bring him to justice. This piece was probably actually a PR thing, because in the end it resulted with a bad guy going to jail, which that's why you don't hear about it. Because most of the times, if they were to actually divulge how they were able to find some of these criminals, it would frighten people. That's probably why we don't hear about it. I'm sure Google does it all the time. I'm sure Google's probably the number one resource for the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, and any global, intelligence agencies out there.
So you think that Google is also doing this sort of NSO work that Facebook did for the FBI?
Of course, I believe they are. Absolutely, 100%.
100%. But we don't actually have evidence of this. Or do we?
So, I mean, it's not evident, like hard evidence as in a specific scenario. I've seen enough interviews by whistleblowers from the CIA, the NSA, and the FBI that basically don't go into specifics, but talk about in generalities how these tech companies are utilized in their efforts to fight terrorism and find criminals and things of that nature. So, you're right. I mean, can I say definitively on a specific case that would prove that they do that? Not off the top of my head, but now it's making me think about going down some rabbit holes, because the thing of it is, that's really bad PR. It's something that would be suppressed. It's not something that would be really highlighted. I mean, I think in some scenarios, like, it might work to their advantage. It's to talk about it, or to allow something to be published, or to comment on something. But generally speaking, I don't think that it's in the best interest for them to talk about it. Just like, because those are vulnerabilities that are worth tons of money, tons and tons of money. And it's in their best interest for them not to be patched. because then they lose the ability to leverage them to access whatever they need to. So I feel like it's one of those things where it's like, if it was happening, we won't know about it for like 20 years or 50 years or whenever the hell, things get declassified.
Yeah, but like Facebook doesn't need that money. Like Facebook doesn't need millions of dollars from the FBI.
Oh,
Like
sure they
why would
do.
they do this?
Sure they do. They,
I mean,
absolutely.
that's they burn through like millions of like hard drives on a single data center in a week, I guess. I don't know
Yeah.
how often, but
And they get to devalue their hardware, just like any other company, to get tax deductions for that stuff. I mean, it's not. This is just doing business. This is just the cost of doing business.
but like you don't go to the government if you're a multi-billion dollar organization. You don't go to the FBI and make $1 million on an exploit to make money. You know what I'm saying?
I don't think they're going to the three-letter agencies. I think they're being approached by them. I think the NSA, is coming to them and saying like, look, there's a couple ways we can handle this. We can work together. We'll gladly pay you for your data. You're going to get a government contract, or we can make life difficult for you. I'm not saying it's probably that cut and dry, but there's definitely record of NSA paying big tech companies, Facebook, Google, and they pay them millions, and that was all revealed in the Prism surveillance program. And that was back then.
Yeah.
So when you say like, do they really need the money? Like, probably not. I mean, they could probably get away without it, but at the same time, these are for-profit businesses that need to report earnings quarterly to their shareholders, and so anywhere they can get extra money is never a bad thing. And what do they got to do? Provide access to something they already have to law enforcement? Like, from an internal perspective, how is that a bad thing? And we're going to get paid? Like, sign me up, right? I mean, that's probably how they feel about it.
No, but like for this specific case, for the Tails case, like they
Yeah,
actually had to go out of their way to break a product that's not even theirs.
right, sure. And I'm sure there are plenty of one-offs like that we don't know about. Um,
But what's in it for them? Like I don't understand. Like the money is not cannot be the value. Like
yeah,
even if it costs like $1.5 million, like that's peanuts for Facebook.
sure. Yeah. Yeah, they probably make that in like 5 minutes in ad sales, but
Yeah.
no, I mean, it's a valid point. So it makes me wonder like how much influence there is from within inside the organization. What motivates them to do that beyond, oh, you're going to pay us $1 million, $1.5 million to like spend all of this resource from our top engineers to try to physically locate someone who's using Tor. Like, okay, we'll give it a shot. Like, what actually makes them say yes? That I'm not sure. I don't know, because I mean, you're right. It wouldn't necessarily be worth it for that small amount of money, but it could be that that's one of the incentives of a larger retainer, if you will. So let me, like, for instance, let's say you're Facebook and I'm FBI, and I come to you and I say, look, I know we got this retainer for $50 million a year to have your cooperation. And because we're a client of yours, we get a reduced rate on project specific tasks. So we'd like you to help us with this one thing to track down this person. So can you help us out? Yeah, sure. We'll do some billable hours for some of our top engineers for a week or two or something. And maybe that was the tab, $1.5 million. That's because you have to look at these as like consulting gigs, right? Most of the NSA are government contracts. They're not necessarily like a shitload of NSA employees hacking away at their computers. They're basically contracts going to Dell, IBM, Booz Allen, tons of contracting companies. These are basically full of tech people, super smart people making shitloads of money. And Facebook, in my opinion, in this like relationship kind of structure, is, I would just look at them as another consulting company for the NSA. I wouldn't look at them as like anything different than that. So really, it's not so much that they would, go to Facebook to try to have them do. It could have just as easily been Dell or Booz Allen or any number of contracting agencies out there who probably could have done the same thing. It's just that the expertise required just happened to lie within the Facebook IT organization or engineering organization, and this was a side project, but they're already a retained client. At least that's how I would probably assume, or based on what I know, and I've worked in consulting, in my personal career, and a lot of these companies that we would go into, we weren't the only ones there. There was Accenture consultants, there was other consultants from other software vendors. So we would work with them, and none of them were employees of the big company that we were doing work for. That's common. So I think that's probably a similar scenario in this case. I don't think that's anything unique at all. And just like I was saying, I'm sure they have the same relationship with Google and Microsoft and Cisco and Juniper and all these different companies, hardware and software.
So maybe this was just a very rare peek into the business as usual, I guess.
Business as usual. It could have also been strategic in saying, like, hey, yeah, go ahead and put out a PR release on this and let people know we can track you even if you're using Tails, bitch. Kind of a thing. Like, seriously, like, because the general public would not even know what the hell they're talking about.
Yeah.
So. I think it's possible. I'm not saying I'm just saying I think it's possible that it's a signal. Hey, we can track you. We'll find you.
I think
bad enough, we'll get you.
Yeah, that's definitely possible because I don't know. Like, this is such a singular story that doesn't really make sense on its own. It only makes sense if it's in context, if it's part of something bigger, even though that sounds, strange, but, I'm pretty sure that you know what I'm trying to say.
No,
here.
I know what you mean. And I think that it's, if you look at it just within that one example, it doesn't make any sense. But if you step back and look at it from a wider lens, then it makes perfect sense that these companies are all, there's no difference between, if you wanted, if you're a company that makes a widget, you can get a government contract, you can get on a GSA schedule and sell your products to the government, whether it's state or local, state or federal, and therefore you're a contractor of the government. And so I don't think there's much difference in relationship with tech companies and the NSA or the FBI or CIA when it comes to talent as the widget of the product for sale. It's probably the same thing, and they're probably certainly not going to talk about every instance that they find bad people. When I say bad people, kind of like tongue in cheek, because there's not really much incentive to divulge it, but there's probably in some cases, there's a reason to issue a PR release. It helps people sleep at night, and it justifies the expenditure of the budget. But I mean, from every company, from Facebook to Akamai to every tech company, is going to probably have considered having some sort of government contract on some level or working with them. Money's money.
It is.
And it's, and the downside is it's hard to understand like where those lines end with the company and begin with the government. I don't think there's any lines really anymore. I think it's just kind of like, I think it's just open access. I don't know, until a whistleblower tells us exactly it, we won't really know, but we do know that we never have even a piece of the information, a piece of the pie. But you have to kind of, so we're left up to our own devices, right? And use deduction to try to like maybe make our best guess. And I think that's all I'm trying to do is, you know, where, where do the lines get drawn? And I think it's just too blurry at this point.
I totally agree with you there. It is. It's like the collusion has been happening for decades, and it's now so intertwined that there's basically no difference. Corporations are run as governments, and governments are run as corporations. It's it's pretty strange. I kind of expected contracts to be a commonplace, but this is actually pretty strange. I never had the chance to actually discuss this with anyone, so I'm very glad that you shared your input. And this is a difficult case because if you are publicly like condemning what the FBI did here or what Facebook did here, like it is easy for the opposing side to lump you with those kinds of people, which would be incredibly bad faith and unfair. But like, this is what they are doing. Oh, so like you are part of these people. Like you want to actually protect these horrible people that are doing horrible things. And I'm glad that they caught the guy, but like maybe this wasn't the best way to go about this.
Right. And the other thing too is that it's easy to kind of look at like, oh, the NSA, the CIA is the boogeyman. But again, when you understand that like there is so much that is contracted out to multiple companies that are all outsourced, they're usually working um, kind of compartmentalized from the big picture. It's easy to vilify this like kind of boogeyman. But the boogeyman is probably could just be some, middle-aged person with a family, wife, husband, kids, whatever, working from home on a project. And it's basically thousands of different people like that, all the sum of their efforts get contributed to algorithms and different technology stacks that allow their technologies to scale. And there's not like their personal morals or ethics are not attached to the project. It's just a job for them. And we kind of like, it's easy to think of like the NSA is like some, group of people wearing hoodies sitting in the dark spying on you. And it's like, it's much more sophisticated than that. It's much more like broken out than that. Right. And I mean, that may exist for some scenarios. Maybe this guy might have felt this way. This Buster Hernandez might have felt that way being targeted, but mostly it's done on such a large scale and compartmentalized from each other that they probably don't even really understand, unless they're like on the really like the analysts on the inside working in their control centers and things like that, in these different listening posts and stuff that the NSA has. Those people probably have an idea, but the everyday person who's just a contractor for one of these, Accentures or whoever, they're not part of the, the plan to surveil everyone. That's, it's
Yeah.
so sometimes, that's why it's like kind of have to, I have to step back and look at this going like, well, what's probably really, really going on? And based on what I know from doing consulting in my own career, that it's not always so like spooky necessarily. And I did business intelligence consulting. So, basically, when it comes to analyzing data, I did that for quite a long time, building dashboards and databases, automating, ETL to build data marts from transactional databases and things, and make it useful information to analysts. Give it, have be able to build KPI dashboards and all these different things. So, you have so many different people doing a lot of different things that a lot of these people just have like this kind of like task to do, pull this lever, right? Not
Yeah.
knowing how it's going to be used later on or where, but that's not really of your concern because you've got enough on your plate that you just need to get done. So, how far that goes with Facebook specifically within this case, I don't know, but I would just have to assume that Facebook has that normal contractor relationship, just as hundreds or thousands of other contracts that they have open, and they are in the thousands, those contracts. So they could be fulfilled by any organization that qualifies.
It sounds like you're sort of saying that this particular case is just one out of thousands, which would amount to billions of dollars
Right.
for them.
Correct. And, why there isn't more news stories like that one specifically, it's probably on purpose. I really would think that it's just purposely, like when they put out a PR release or some sort of news release about something like that, it's to benefit them. I mean, because no one's blackmailing them.
Yeah.
Right? You'll die.
Yeah.
They'll kill you before you get to blackmail them. Avoid hot tubs and small aircraft. So, yeah, It's like, oh, the cameras were broken. He hung himself. We don't know how it happened. He's got two two exit wounds through his skull, but he killed himself. Come on.
Yeah.
Again, I try not to go too conspiracy theorist, but it's like, sometimes you just can't help it in these scenarios.
I mean, we should go into conspiracy theories in some future episodes.
I would love to. It's something that it's more of a hobby. I don't take it too seriously.
Yeah.
And I just really enjoy listening to other possibilities. I was listening to, I went back and re-listened to Bob Lazar on the Joe Rogan podcast.
Yeah.
And it's like, look, I personally don't really believe in aliens or anything, but it's like I'm open to the possibility, right? So it's like when I hear and see someone like that guy talking, I'm like, I'm trying to find something wrong with him. I'm trying to find a reason why he would lie about working on a flying saucer's propulsion system, right? This like nuclear reactor, or I don't know if it's nuclear, but some kind of a reactor that he's explaining. And I'm like, the level of detail and some of the things that this guy is unimpressed with the technology, I'm kind of feeling like it's true. I'm just like, I don't want to believe it, but I'm kind of believing it. So yeah, I love that kind of stuff. It's, again, I really do take it all. It just, with a grain of salt. It's more entertaining than anything else. But
it's good fun. Yeah,
it is good fun. It's healthy, I think.
Yeah,
maybe.
Yeah. I mean, there are real conspiracies in the world, but
Sure.
Most of them just happen in like plain sight, and they are just good about lying or hiding it, or it's just a matter of not enough public coverage. But one of the conspiracy theories that I believe in is, sort of for fun, is that Mark Zuckerberg is not a real human. Maybe something else.
I love that, like like a lizard or alien or robot or some sort of artificial intelligence. I would entertain that. I would absolutely entertain that.
Yeah, I've never seen someone like it. I mean, I'm pretty awkward, and I've seen awkward people, but this is something else, really. Like I don't know if you personally have seen something like this, but like Mark is on a different level.
Yeah. Definitely operating on a different frequency than everyone else, it seems.
Yeah, but we should cover this in some of our future episodes. It'll be fun.
I'm down.
Yeah. Anything else that you wanted to talk about? It's been 3 hours.
I think I'm pretty full at this point. I think there's a lot to process here.
Yeah, this has been amazing. Another delicious episode. So I'm very glad that we went through this. It went through actually pretty quickly, and I hope that the listeners will find it enjoyable as well.
Likewise, it's been a pleasure talking to you once again, and I look forward to the next one. Hopefully, people enjoy my craziness. So.
It is amazing. The feedback is overwhelmingly positive. So there will be a next episode sometime. So stay tuned, people.
Yes, looking forward to it.
Yeah. Have a good night, I guess.